IB Nation, Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. That's Vince D'Addario. I'm Brian Driscoll. The OG's back with you, and we're going to put a final bow here, Vince, on the Notre Dame victory over Virginia. This is our part for the review. We both dove into the film. We've been kind of texting back and forth, calling back and forth. Vince is more of a texter. I'm more of a talker. And that's going to shock a lot of you. And so sometimes I need to talk things through a little bit. And I can tell when I've called too much because I get the hello from Vince because it's like, okay, I've called one too many times. But we've had a lot to talk about, Vince, after diving into the film. And so we're going to talk about that. First segment today is going to be sort of a reversal. Normally it's Vince is on the post-game show, and then I come on and I share my overall thoughts. Today that's going to be mostly Vince. I'll have some of my own thoughts after watching the film, but we'll get a lot of Vince's thoughts about the game, and then we'll do Keys to Victory Revisited, offense and defense, and then final segment of today's show will be us looking at sort of a wrap-up of the weekend as well, upon further review of the college football weekend, and how we think that's going to impact the pending rankings that are coming out on Tuesday. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. Vince actually went through and did a 1 through 15 projection of what he thinks the rankings are going to look like, and we'll talk about that as well. Because there's certainly going to be a shakeup, Vince. You know, another top 10 team went down. Another week where Notre Dame fans are complaining about Notre Dame only winning by 21, while other top 10 teams are like, I wish we would have won by 1, much less 21. So,
right.
You know, but a lot to live there. So, dude, it was another win for Notre Dame. It's 8 in a row. I believe my math was in that 8-game win streak. Notre Dame is outscoring their opponents. I believe it's something like 42.6 to 42.9 to 10.6, I believe, is the average score for Notre Dame during this 8-game win streak. So a lot of butt whoopings being handed out. And Saturday wasn't the prettiest of the butt whoopings we've seen, but it was a butt whooping nonetheless.
Yeah.
When your team leads 35-0 late in the third quarter, then you know what? You had a pretty convincing victory, Vince. So we'll talk a lot about that, and then keys to victory, a little playoff talk. If you want to get a question in, obviously this is not a mailbag day. Go ahead and throw a super chat in there, and we'll address those at the end of the day. So that's what we got going on. It's going to be fun.
Yeah.
It's going to be fun, Vince.
It is going to be fun. Look, it was not the prettiest game, obviously, in the world. And there's some angst out there amongst some Notre Dame fans about kind of the way things looked and the way things were and how it went down and blah, blah, blah. And my response, because a couple people texted me about it, and my response was basically, look, Notre Dame didn't play the cleanest of games, and they still dominated their opponent. Dominated the opponent. And look, you look at 35-14, final score, and you're like, I hate to be the guy that was like, wow, that wasn't really how the game went. That wasn't indicative of how, the game flow and all that. And it's true, but that's not how I want to lead this off. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to be that guy. Okay. Notre Dame it was 14-0. And Brian and I are sitting there and we're watching the game. We're talking about it. I was like, man, if they could just go down and get this one score, and then they get the ball at halftime, and then they go down and score again, and this one's over. You know what I mean? And I was like, I looked right at Brian and I said, they're going to get 2 scores here. He's like, greedy. You're greedy. And I said,
I looked at you and called you a greedy person who doesn't have a father, is what I called you, I believe.
Yes, you did.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and I was like, you're just being greedy right now. I was like, dude,
right.
They just now got the 14, and you just kind of looked at me like, you kind of looked at me like, you remember that scene in Waterboy where his girlfriend tells Lynn Swan what the score? Oh, it's not no prediction. That's how it's going to be. That was like kind of how Vince responded to me. I kind of was getting Waterboy flashbacks. I felt like Lynn Swan for a second. That's how confident Vince was. And you know what happened? That greedy, was right. They got.
They scored like 3 touchdowns, 4 touchdowns, or something. Yeah,
they scored 4 touchdowns in like the last 5 minutes because only 2 of them counted. You know what I mean? It was like I had a 78-yard touchdown calling off the board. I forget how long the Justin Faison one was, but yeah, you was pretty convincing, man.
But yeah, this in we go back and we look at the film and we kind of break some things down, and we'll talk about that more as we get into the keys of the game and things like that. But Notre Dame needed to go out there. They continue to have to make a statement every week. I mean, that's just the way things are. They got to make a statement, and they did. I mean, they made a statement. They still won 35-14. And if anybody actually watches the game, and the committee claims that they watched the game, they were up 35-0 late in the third quarter. They gave up a garbage touchdown with literally less than a minute to go, where Virginia's calling timeouts to make sure that they can punch it in with their first team offense against Notre Dame's second plus walk-ons. Okay. Which, whatever, man. Like, it's still Notre Dame's job to stop them. I was annoyed. Timeout. They scored what?
They scored with 18 seconds left.
Okay. I was still annoyed they called a timeout, but at the same time, Notre Dame still needs to stop them. And they didn't at the end, so it's 35-14. Cool. Maybe that gives Virginia extra chutzpah when they get back on the plane, headed back to Virginia.
I had no problem with Notre Dame being pissed, and I had no problem with Virginia trying to still play for 60 minutes.
Yeah.
That's how I look at it.
Yep, exactly. You still got to play ball, and that's totally fine. So, look, there are certain things that look good. There were times where Riley Leonard looked really, really good. There was a point in the game where he was like 79% completion percentage and, was doing some good things. And then there were times where he missed, the interception was a bad pick. He threw into triple coverage, not good. So that was a little bit frustrating. There were times where, the running backs were an eyelash away from breaking some big runs. Finally, obviously, Jeremiah Love does break that big run. It's like, okay, you can kind of breathe a little bit easier. But at the same time, Notre Dame did a great job in the run game with how much they were averaging on the ground. I mean, Jeremiah Love averaged 8.6 yards a carry. Darian Price averaged 7.3 yards a carry. Leonard really never got going, but they didn't really ask him to get going either. A lot of his yards were from scramble yardage and some things like that. So, and then the defense, I mean, look.
Yeah, we'll get into all that. Right? But before we do go too far into that, Vince, we do need to have a little brief talk about
our friends over at our friends over at MyBookie. Don't forget about MyBookie, everybody. If you were logged on to MyBookie and you did what you needed to do, you could have won some money this past weekend on Notre Dame. And if it was your first time using MyBookie, and if you used promo code IRISH, then you could have doubled your deposit right off the bat. Bing, bang, boom, baby. You got your win. You got double the money, and you're good to go. Then when you continue using MyBookie and you can get into their rewards program and you can do all kinds of fun stuff with that, then they're going to reward you for continuing to use MyBookie. So you want to make sure that you get onto MyBookie. First time, they're going to double your money. Then you're going to be a user that's on there all the time. Get into their loyalty rewards program. That's absolutely what you want to do. And then they've got their no sweat bets on Thursdays, I do believe, where it takes all the guesswork out of it and all the you're not going to lose anything. It's fantastic. All you can do is win. So that's what you want to do on Thursday. So you want to jump over to MyBookie, bet anything, anytime, from anywhere with MyBookie, the sports book that gives you control and will reward you for every moment of play. So those are our friends over at MyBookie. So don't forget about that.
Vince, I actually had a question for you about that. Do you know what the final spread was? Because I've seen a debate between 21.5, I've seen 21, and I've seen 20.5. So do you have any idea? Like, I know there's different ones, but do you
got
have
it
any
on
idea?
The day of at 22.5, I do believe, or 22. One of the two. Either way, it was a bad beat for me with that last touchdown on that one. So
a lot of
that
people
was
lost some money on that one.
Now you can get on there and you can move the line and it'll change the odds. And so I know some people made the line a little bit smaller, and so they would have been okay if they were 20 or less, obviously. But yeah, so it wasn't good. It was a bad beat, as they say in the world of betting. So
bad beat usually makes me think of music, but that's a different conversation. Vince, before we dive specifically into the offense and the defense, I did want to kind of get your thoughts on just the overall performance. Like, I know I leaned over to you during pregame and I told you, Angela's down the field. She usually has a really good read on just the energy level and things like that. And she said they're pretty fired up.
Yeah.
And I thought they came out that way as well. But just kind of overall thoughts on the victory, on the overall team performance, just kind of, obviously final home game of the regular season, just kind of your overall thoughts of what you saw from Notre Dame yesterday and just overall impressions from the win.
I haven't had an issue with the energy level, the excitement level, the ready to play level. I haven't had an issue with that since the beginning of the season. The Northern Illinois game obviously was not great. And then once they started getting further and further away from that, I haven't had that issue with this team. I mean, they play hard. It's not like they're mailing it in. I have no problem on that front. There were a lot of physical mistakes in this game that are uncharacteristic, I would say, for a decent chunk of guys, right? I mean, Bo Collins doesn't drop that many balls on a regular basis. I mean, and there were some times where I think that he wasn't maybe giving the best effort on some of his routes or something like, but when the ball hits you in the chest like that and you drop it, and then there was some other drops in the game, like those are physical errors, which they happen. I mean, it's sport, right? Physical errors happen. There wasn't as many mental errors as I don't know if I want to say would have anticipated or whatever. It was more physical errors than mental errors for me. There were errors on the offensive line that I think were physical errors, not effort errors. You know what I mean? They weren't moving their feet. They weren't doing certain things. They were physical errors that can get cleaned up for sure. So for me, overall, this team was ready to play. I mean, they came out ready to play. They got the ball on the kickoff. They went down, they punched it in offensively. The defense, they didn't give up much of anything, to be perfectly honest with you, the entire game. There was a play here or a play there, like the one big first completion that they had against Notre Dame's defense. They were trying to strip the ball so much that they got an extra like 10 or 12 yards, it felt like. You know what I mean? But they're in there trying to rip the ball and do some different things where it's like, hey, guys, just take them down, just take them down to the ground. So those are physical errors, I don't really have that can get cleaned up. Those guys are trying to make plays. They're trying to turn the ball over. They're trying to, loosen the ball from the ball carrier. Obviously, special teams continues to be a bit of an issue when it comes to certain areas, and we can talk about that as we move forward as well. But overall,
I was going to ask you about the special teams. Don't worry.
Okay, well, then I'll wait on that. But overall, I thought the energy level of the team was good. I don't think they had like a senior day hangover or anything like that. That didn't come across to me in any way, shape, or form. So, I mean, they prepared well. Again, they didn't play their best game. A lot of physical errors, but they still dominated Virginia from start to almost finish, right? So I was happy with the performance overall, but like it just kind of left you wanting more a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, because we know that this team is better and they should have done more, but they still won 35-14.
You kept saying physical mistakes, and that made me think of a comment that I made last night that I wanted to get your opinion on.
Okay.
I felt last night that this was not a well-executed game on both sides of the ball. I mean, we're up here talking. I'm like, dude, I'm so glad that he didn't see Chris Tyree. We were actually outside at that time. Do you remember that play where I was like, I'm so glad he didn't see Chris Tyree and looked right instead of left, because there was nobody ran with Chris Tyree and the screenplay and things like that. But one thing that I came impressed by, and I haven't heard this talked enough about, I thought they were physically really, really dominant against Virginia. Like, I mean, I don't know how many times we had a stoppage and play because the Virginia guy was slow to get off the turf.
It was a lot.
That's one thing that I came away where. That's why I think that in the past, Vince, you and I have walked out of that stadium together many times where we're just like, what the heck was that we just watched? Where it's like, this team didn't even want to be here, including one on September 7th.
Yeah.
Let's be honest about that. But what makes this team so different is that, and this is where I feel like separates the great teams from the good teams, is even though they didn't have it execution-wise, maybe focus-wise, I thought this was a really physical football game for Notre Dame. And I thought they took the fight to Virginia physically. The execution wasn't there, but I thought physically, boy, this was a really like a smack you in the mouth type of game from on both sides of the ball. There's a lot of like, oh, did you see that kind of hit? Or you look at the replay and you're like, yeah, now I know why that guy was slow to get off the turf. And Virginia, and I felt like it was matching that from Virginia, because that's how I felt Virginia played coming into the game, was as a physical football team. And I felt like Notre Dame did a really good job of matching that and then taking it even further, because Notre Dame had some guys that, were slow off the turf, but it wasn't very many. And I felt like every series there was somebody from Virginia that was kind of limping off the field.
Yeah.
Because of just how physical Notre Dame was. Am I seeing? Am I overplaying that, or did you? What were your thoughts on that?
No, I think that's where you verbalized it differently than I did, but like the energy level, that's energy level to me. It's taking the fight to the other team, right? And I thought that they did that all night long. I was going to save some of that for when we talk about defense, but like they dominated the trenches on the defensive side of the ball, and that's a toughness issue. You know what I mean? Because there's been plenty of times where Notre Dame's been the more talented team, but they didn't dominate at that spot. NIU, for example, but they dominated the offensive line of Virginia all night long. Like the line of scrimmage belonged to Notre Dame, and it wasn't all that close. You know what I mean? And that's where physical pounding comes into play, right there. And so, no, I completely agree with you. That's like an energy thing for me. That's like are you ready to come out and lay the wood? They were. And that, so you verbalized it differently.
Why don't you take that and just carry that right into your thoughts on the defense, Vince? I think it'd be a nice transition just to kind of segue right into your thoughts on the defense.
Yeah. So the defense, as you're watching, Virginia's offense, or any offense really so far this year, and we kind of talked about it, you, me, and Trevor up in the box, was teams continue to try, because they know that Notre Dame is really good up the middle. So they try to get outside on Notre Dame, and they try shovel passes, and they try toss sweeps, and they try to get outside of Notre Dame. And for a split second, as you're sitting up on the 9th floor of Notre Dame Stadium and you're looking down and you're like, ooh, they might have something here. And then all of a sudden it's like 4 gold helmets just converge on the ball carrier, either at or behind the line of scrimmage, or maybe a yard, you know what I mean, of positive gaining. And it's like, okay, this Notre Dame defense is really, really fast, and they get to the ball carrier in bunches. And that is something that is fairly new. They always attempted to do that. The try was there, but the execution wasn't necessarily there, because they didn't lack the speed and the ability to get there on a regular basis, right? That has completely shifted on the defensive side of the football, Brian. And when you're standing up there on the 9th floor looking down and you just see it happen live, it's like, okay, like Notre Dame is really fast sideline to sideline. And if they want to keep trying to get Notre Dame out leveraged, to the sideline and all these different things, it's like you might get them once or twice, but after that, it's never going to happen again. And it didn't even happen once or twice in this game. And that was the thing that really stood out to me defensively, was how fast Notre Dame was just coming downhill sideline to sideline, and Virginia didn't really have any answers for that. And the other piece is Notre Dame's pass defense continues to basically dominate. And that, look, that's all 3 levels, obviously, but you look at the injuries that have happened on this defense and the fact that Notre Dame is still, I think, statistically the best pass defense in the country, pass efficiency defense in the country. That's amazing. And they continued that. I mean, all you have to do is look. Virginia made a quarterback change in this game, and it wasn't because they were going to all their second string guys. It's because their starting quarterback was 8 of 21 for 69 yards with 3 interceptions and a completion percentage of 38%, right? He was completely ineffective. Part of that's on him, but a lot of that goes to Notre Dame.
Well, to back up what you said, Vince, I pointed this out last night. Anthony Calandri, his lowest completion percentage of his career was like 56.9 in like 17 starts.
Yeah.
It was a 38.7 yesterday. To also add, to answer your question, Vince, yes, Notre Dame is the number 2 team in the number 1 pass defense in the country in pass efficiency defense. They're at 88.89. Texas is number 2. Notre Dame is number 2 in passing yards allowed. They are number 2 in fewest yards allowed per attempt behind Texas. Texas is also number 1 in passing yards allowed. And they're number 1 in lowest completion percentage allowed. Number 2 is Texas A&M, by the way. Number 4 is Northern Illinois. So Notre Dame has played 2 of the teams in the top 10. But what's interesting is they're at 47.7. The next closest is A&M at 51.5. So they're significantly lower than anybody else. So yeah, they're 1 or 2 in almost every category. They're 3rd in fewest touchdowns allowed at 6, behind Ohio State and Texas, and they are tied for 7th in interceptions. So if you look at it, they are the worst rating they have. If you just look at those numbers that CFB Stats has, they are no lower than 7th in anything, and that is interceptions. They're in the top 3 and everything else. I'm gonna go check yards per completion, but they don't have that on here. But yeah, their pass defense lost Cam Hart from last year, lost Thomas Harper from last year, lost DJ Brown from last year, lost Benjamin Morrison in the middle of this season, and they're even better against the pass this year than they were last year.
And that part is just mind-boggling to me. And then you add in the losses that they've had on the defensive line as well, which goes into pass efficiency and that kind of stuff. And it's just pay Al Golden, make sure he sticks around forever. Like that's where I'm at with this whole thing, because he continues. Not only does he continue to call good games and have good game plans, and the in-game adjustments are next level, but they're obviously recruiting at a high level as well. And I'm giving him credit for that, obviously, but also, the defensive assistants are doing an amazing job of bringing in the proper talent and all of that. But man, this defense is so good. And when you look now and you look into the near future, right? 25, 26, like I don't see where there's going to be a drop off. Now I know that's looking ahead. That's not what this show is, but it's like this defense just continues to get better, even though they've lost very key parts of this defense
from last year's team and from this year's team.
Yeah.
Right?
And they're continuing to be elite.
Notre Dame will never lose Al Golden because of money. Al Golden's not going to leave for a pay raise. Al Golden's going to leave because he sees other opportunities that he wants to challenge himself from a career standpoint. And there's a head coach in the college football or as a defensive coordinator in the National Football League. That would be the only reason that I believe he would leave. Let's go to the other side, Vince. Again, it was a very strong defensive performance yet again. Let's talk offense. Just overall thoughts. What did you think of the game plan? You talked earlier about Riley Leonard. What are some other parts? I'm going to ask you about the O-line, so you don't need to focus on that one yet. I'll ask you about that one yet. But just overall thoughts on the offensive game plan. Were you surprised at all by the fact that they didn't come out as aggressive as maybe we thought, with maybe the tempo that we thought they were going to have coming in?
Yeah, a little bit. They weren't as aggressive as I thought that they were going to be right away. There was a lot of underneath stuff they were attempting to do. Some of the runs were kind of right up the middle. And it was a little curious at times. Now, they were pretty much handling what Virginia was attempting to throw at them, but I also thought that there were opportunities that they didn't necessarily take advantage of. And I'm trying to understand like what the thought process was there. Now, there were also a few execution issues as well. Some drops, obviously. I think there was a couple of reads both in the run game and the pass game that Riley didn't do a great job of. But he also made some really good throws as well. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to take that away from him, but there were some questionable decisions.
Let me say this, and you give me a true false.
Okay.
And you can elaborate on it. This was one of Riley Leonard's best games throwing the football, meaning just how it came out, accuracy, pushing it down the field. Just how it came is more just how it looked. And I thought the throw to Jaden Harrison was the best throw he's made in Notre Dame uniform.
Oh,
this was a step back, not a step back, because I hate that, because it's not. So this was not a good performance from him from a reading the defense standpoint.
Agreed.
And keeping his eyes downfield and a timing standpoint. I thought pre and post snap reads and timing of throwing the football outside of a couple throws, I thought were off in this game.
No, I think that's fair. I think that's true. I think that's absolutely fair. I think I leaned over to you at one point during the game, though, and when one of the times when he was scrambling around, and I was like, that's what Riley Leonard gives you, though, too. It's he does keep his eyes up most of the time and is able to find some guys that it's outside the scope of the play.
Couple guys. He had Jordan Faison
wide open. He went. You're talking about the play where it was second quarter. Yeah. Or end of the first quarter, whatever. Faison comes from the far left. He's the outside receiver on the left-hand side, and Riley ends up bailing to the right. And he's looking, and Faison is wide open coming across the field, and Riley doesn't see him. And he ends up tucking the ball, and I think he gains 3 or 4 yards or whatever on a scramble. But that could have been a big play right there.
Wide open.
And that is a play that Riley Leonard has made on a fairly consistent basis this year. And so I was a little surprised.
Going too fast for him.
Yeah.
I don't say his head. He looked a little bit just like he was rushing stuff. Like there was a throw also where I think it was Bo Collins ran a corner route. It was I think it was one of those corner slides where the outside guy ran a corner, and the corner back, it was in the end zone. Mitchell Evans ran the slide. The corner back had his hips facing inside. And when Bo hit the top end of his drop, he actually squatted on Bo's inside move, and then Bo smoked him outside. It would have been an easy touchdown.
Yeah.
But Riley went away from him so quickly. And you're like, dude, there's no reason to go away from him. Like, like he went away from him before he even got to the top of his drop. So I thought his timing with his reads and decision making was not good.
Yeah.
And that kept the offense from really taking advantage. But I actually thought throwing the ball, it was coming out good. He was throwing confidently. I mean, like I said, the throw there, the Jaden Greathouse throw on the play, he got hurt. He had a couple of the throw he made to Jaden Harrison on the touchdown, which you and I were talking about. Like, I wish they would do more. And he put some zip on it. It was a tad high, but it's like, you're throwing to a 5'10" guys, you know.
True.
But I thought that I would like to see them do more of that stuff out of motion. Like the long 78-yard touchdown play. Again, it was a play where they motioned, and that motion got that backside safety thinking, and then they had 2 guys squeeze on that in route by Jaden Thomas, and that opened up Jaden Harrison. They do a lot. They're a lot more effective when they are moving pre-snap than when they run static. Once again, we saw that yesterday a lot. But yeah, Vince, I just thought throwing the ball, he looked good. Reading the ball, timing-wise, I didn't think he looked good. And the running backs, I mean, what can we say?
I mean, they're both elite.
And it isn't just Price and Love anymore, because I thought Aeneas looked pretty good.
I thought he had actually one of his better games. He did a great job in pass pro, and then he did a great job when the ball was put in his hands. Once on I believe on a catch, and then also when he's running the football. I think he's just getting better and better and better. And early on in the season, I was a little skeptical as to why he's kind of your third down back as a true freshman. You know what I mean? Like that's what you always hear, right? They got to learn how to pass pro, and they got to pick up the blitz, and it's way too early to do that, and And they throw in a true freshman, and he's been there since day one, right? I mean, at least game one, I should say. He may not have been the plan in the fall camp, but game one, that's who was there. And I questioned it, to be perfectly honest with you. And he has proved me wrong. He has done a fantastic job in that role. It is a very specific role. But it's not a small role, right, Brian? I mean, it's third down, man. Those are big time opportunities. And they're also starting to trust him more by letting him run the football more. In third down opportunities. So I think that makes their third down packages even better. Now, did it show statistically in this game? No, because they were in third and long a lot in this game, like third and double digits. That's a problem they're going to have to clean up. Like that's something you can't ignore. Their third down conversion rate was not good because they were in third and distance. They were one for 12, right? And it was some of their third downs were ridiculous, and you can't put yourself behind the sticks like that. So that's something they're going to have to clean up. A lot of times that happened because of penalties, right? And you can complain about the officiating. The officiating wasn't good overall, but some of those penalties that put them behind the sticks, they were legit.
Yeah, like the 78-yard touchdown, that was a legit call on Coogan. That was
you can't put your hand up in his face like that. I mean, look,
and it was like there for a second. It was like there for a second. It was a legit.
Yeah. Call. You can be upset about it, but you can't do that, And I actually leaned over to Brian, and I was like, he wasn't even looking. Like, he didn't even mean to do it. And you're like, yeah, he's got to move his arm down. You can't have your arm
you don't go up like this, right?
And I was like, yeah, you're right. Okay, I'm just mad that the touchdown.
Most guys don't mean to face mask a ball carrier. It's still a face mask.
Yeah,
it's
right.
Like intention is like not necessarily the rules. Like, well, I don't think he meant to hold him. You know what I mean? It's like, well, hold on, I didn't mean to throw that ball to the defense. Can I get it back, please?
Yeah, right. Totally get that. Yeah.
So it's not like when we were kids and you're playing street ball and you're like, I called timeout first. You didn't hear me? I called timeout first. Yeah, no, doesn't work like that.
Yeah, so I mean, you can't blame everything on the officiating. They can't put themselves in position on third down like that. You just can't do it. And so they're going to have to clean that up. That's my biggest, honestly, Brian, that's my biggest negative takeaway from the offense was third down and the position that they put themselves in on third down.
I would say the biggest issue I had on them was first and second down, and how many penalties and bad plays they had to put them in those third down situations.
Fair enough. We're saying the same thing. Yeah, it's just a matter of that. Yeah,
we are.
Agreed.
We are. Vince, I'm going to wrap up with this, my friend. I made you laugh when I had a comment about the special teams during the game on Saturday. I want to hear your thoughts on the special teams play. My comment, and I said it in the post-game show, I said, boy, they're really good at almost blocking kicks. That's something, and fakes. That's something Marty Biaggi is really good at. And I'm being serious. He's come up with some really creative fakes this year, and they're pretty good at almost blocking kicks.
There's a lot like there. If there was something that you could, receive some sort of award for every time the crowd goes on a punt, Notre Dame would be first in the country on that.
They lead the nation in almost blocking kicks. There's no doubt.
It's true. It's true. Look, it is unfortunate that Mitch Jeter is injured. Okay, because he came out to kick that extra point. It was ugly, and I think he hurt himself again. That's my take on watching what he did, because the very next time that they had a kick opportunity, they had somebody else. They had Diomede in there to kick the 52-yarder or whatever it ended up being. 54. Yes, it absolutely had the distance. But and up in the press box, it was like, man, he didn't miss by much. And then you look at it on the TV copy.
Yeah, we knew it was right, but we couldn't tell how much because he was kicking it to us.
Lord.
And then we saw the TV copy. You're like, yeah.
I mean, I think he kicked it over the right tackle. Like it was off from the get-go. But anyway, and then they brought out, the other backup kicker to kick the shorter one, and he missed that one as well. And all the people that bet on the game are like, if they just would have hit one of those.
I don't blame the first guy. That was a long.
That was a long one.
He's a third string place kicker, and you're asking him to kick a 54-yarder. Like I thought he put a good effort into it.
Yeah, and it's the second one though. You got to hit that one. Like that's unacceptable. And I've said this before, and I'm not going to belabor the point. I don't care if you're a walk-on. If you can't hit that field goal, you shouldn't be suiting up for a football team. Like you have to be able to hit that.
In fairness to Zach Yoakum, Zach was brought on to Notre Dame to be a kickoff guy, and he's actually a pretty good kickoff guy. If you remember from 2022, he's pretty good at putting that ball into the end zone. Like that's what he was brought in to do. He was never the expectation was never going to be that he was going to be a place kicker. I mean, he had 73 kickoffs in 2022, and 45 of them were touchbacks. You know what I mean? Like he's got a pretty decent leg. When he wants to put in the end zone, he could have. So that's what I'm saying is like, I understand what you're saying, but that's not necessarily what they brought him in to do.
I get it. And look, Eric Goins is doing a good job as the kickoff guy. He's doing exactly what they're asking him to do. When they want him to put it in the end zone, he does. When
How
he needs
bad
position,
is
he does
he
a
as
good
a
job.
place kicker? If he can't get place kicks, I know he missed the PAT against Navy, but it's like, it's a bad deal. Let me just say, somebody asked me this, Vince. I want to speak on this because I know a lot of people. Are you worried about place kicking in the playoffs? And my answer is not really, not yet, because there's going to be 3 weeks between the last game and the playoff game.
Yeah.
Which means you're going to have time to get Mitch Jeter healthy.
Yep, and that's the
I
key.
would strongly consider
shut him down.
Just shutting him down for the next
Shut
2
him
weeks.
down.
Now, it's tough to do that because Army and USC are good teams.
Sure.
But if you know you're not going to have him going into the game, if you're Mike Denbrock and Marcus Freeman, you can game plan for not having him.
Right.
You know what I mean? Eric Goins,
completely
like
agree.
you said, is handling kickoffs. Hey, we know that barring a chip shot from whatever, we're going for it more.
Yeah.
You can game plan that way.
Agreed.
And I would let him rest because I think he needs to physically rest, and I think he needs to mentally rest.
Look,
and then get Mitch back for the postseason. That's as you said, Vince, he's not right. Whether he's physically not right or mentally not right or a little bit of both, because you don't want kickers kicking when they're off physically, because then they develop bad habits.
Correct. You try to
and backs up their
overcompensate and do
technique.
different
Right.
things. Look, and
Right.
I have experience because there's one that lives upstairs. He got injured in the first game of the season. Guy rolled up on his knee on a field goal, right? And so he was dealing with a little bit of an MCL issue all season long. The only thing that fixed it was him sitting out a game. It's the only thing.
Right.
And just shutting it down for 2 straight weeks, Monday through Friday. And then the first time he kicked on the next game was at the game. And the problem was, like, he was kind of trying to manage the pain and do all these different things. And then his left knee started to hurt because he's overcompensating. Right. That's what you're talking about. And I completely agree with you. I think Mitch Jeter's is more of a groin, but the same philosophy applies. Like, the only thing that is going to fix it is rest. And so they just need to shut him down and let him rest it and move on until you get to December 19th, 2021, whatever it is, when that first playoff game is. That's what you need to do. I have a lot of faith in Mitch Jeter. I don't have a whole lot of faith in the other guys, but that's okay. Let's talk punting, because
it was a good thing, but a bad thing, right? I mean, like
yes. Look, we have said numerous times, because we've seen James Rendell, when he just gets the snap, takes 2 steps, and kicks the ball, that he's amazing. Like, he can boot the ball and it comes off his foot like a rocket. And that's what happened in this game on his first punt, kicking into the wind, which was a pretty stiff wind, Brian, in his face. And he still got that punt off, and it was gorgeous. It turned over beautifully. It looked like a quarterback threw it, right? That's what we talk about turnover. Turnover is when it's a spiral and it just cuts through the wind and it just looks beautiful as it goes. Like, that was a beautiful punt. Why they haven't been doing that with, and he also did a great job of pinning them deep a couple different times and putting them inside the 20. Didn't have them rolling out. Didn't have them doing the Australian style kicking. Just let the man punt like he was taught to punt, and you're going to be just fine. Stop overthinking it. That's my biggest thing right now. Stop overthinking the punt operation and just let him do his job, because I just feel like they're in his head. They're making him do some things that he's not comfortable doing, and it shows. It shows. And that's extremely frustrating to me when it comes to the punt game, Brian. Extremely frustrating.
Yeah, I agree. Vince, let's talk about the fake punt.
Yeah, super frustrating.
So
I can explain it.
Please do.
Yeah, as far as the way I understand it, because I have been looking into it over the last, 12 hours or so, or 24 hours. And number one, it's extremely frustrating that they called it, because I think they interpreted the rule incorrectly.
And they called it way late.
Yes. And then they had to talk about it for
was literally
2 or 3 minutes.
running into the end zone when they called that penalty.
Right. And then they had to talk about it. And it was like, if you've got to talk about it that long, it's probably not a penalty. Like, that's my big, like, I leaned over to you at one point. I'm like, this discussion is taking way too long. They're trying to talk themselves into the penalty. That's when you pick it up. That's when you pick it up. You wave it off, and nobody would have had any issues with you waving it off. So the rule is, if it is not a quote unquote obvious kicking formation, okay, then the 5 offensive linemen that are on the line of scrimmage need to have lineman numbers between 50 and 79. Okay. On punt team, you don't have 50 to 79 because you want guys that are athletically enough to get down the field and cover the punt, right? And so you've got different numbers all over the place for the punt team. And so when Jack Kaiser was behind, he was an up back. He was 1.5 yards, by the way, because I went back and looked. He was 1.5 yards behind the center, or behind the snapper. If he was under center, then this rule applies. If it's and the rule book says a hand-to-hand snap, okay? If it's a hand-to-hand snap, then yes, you need to have an offensive line with those numbers, right? But if you have a kicker that is 10 or more yards behind the snapper, okay, or you have a holder and a kicker that are 7 or more yards behind the snapper, and there's nothing impeding that, then that is a obvious kicking formation, okay? Jack Kaiser was 1.5 yards behind the center. He was not hand-to-hand. He was not under center. So that rule should not apply.
Mm-hmm.
They
there was
applied
also a clear kicking.
He was 15 yards
right?
back.
That's part of the rule.
14.5 yards back.
It has to look like there's like the punter can't go running off 12 yards to the right as some sort of fake. Can't do that in this instance.
Yes. So he was back where he was supposed to be. They put Jeremiah Love in motion. They snapped the ball, which, by the way, you can have one guy in motion, obviously. They snapped the ball to Jack Kaiser. He was not under center. He takes the ball, reverse blind handoff to Jordan Faison as he comes around with Jordan Love.
Not behind the center. That's the only thing you could have done if he was tucked right on the center, like he could reach out and get the – because that's the thing is if he was right there where he could have – you could say he could have reached his hand and taken the snap, then you could have said he's ineligible, but he was not. He was clearly off center. And he would not have been in position to take a snap.
He was hiding behind the offensive line. You're absolutely allowed. Yes.
You're allowed to do. Right.
100% allowed to do that. And so that was a completely 100% legal play. The officials botched it. I'm sorry. I don't care what the people on the broadcast said. They botched it.
The numbering thing, Vince, it says there's 3 things to it. Any and all linemen not numbered 50 to 79 who are now ineligible receivers by position become exceptions to the numbering rule when the snapper is established. So, like, if you're inside, it doesn't matter. In the B, any and all such numbering exception players must be on the line and may not be on the end of the line. Otherwise, teammate commits a foul for an ineligible lineman. I looked at the play. That also does not necessarily apply here because of the C. Any and all such players are exceptions to the numbering rule throughout the down and remain ineligible receivers unless they become eligible under Rule 735. So, like, they were all on the line, and – none of them were eligible. Like the 4, because like Josh Burnham was number 40. They only had 99 and 97 were the only 2 numbers that fit in that. But they were on the line, and the center was set. I mean, you read through the rules, they met those rules, and none of those guys got the ball.
Right. Exactly.
That's the other thing. They weren't, and it wasn't a throw. That's the other thing is that would matter more if it was a pass attempt. They didn't do that. It was a handoff.
It was a handoff.
Right.
And you can hand it off to any number, obviously, that you want. You don't have to be eligible to hand off the ball.
And he is an eligible player. Right.
And he's nowhere number 6. That doesn't even matter, obviously. And 24 obviously touched the ball as well. But based on everything that I've looked up, everything that I have read, the research, watching the playback, looking at the personnel, I don't see the penalty. Right. And I'm actually surprised we haven't heard from the ACC yet on this, to be perfectly honest with you. And look, Notre Dame, by the way, I just want to throw this out there as well. Notre Dame did all the things that you're supposed to do. They checked with a team of officials to look at this play and tell us if there's anything wrong with it. And they said, no, you're good. You're legal. Like, they went to officials and they said, look at this. And they had no issues with it. And they've been practicing it forever, for almost a year now. And it was executed to perfection. Unless you have an ACC crew that doesn't know what they're doing. I don't know what else to say.
And I think the fact that they said illegal formation 5 yards, it didn't explain why. Because a lot of times like that, a good lead official will, in a situation like that, will say illegal formation, not enough guys wearing numbers 50 to 79, because they had no guys wearing 50 to 79 on that particular play. They had literally no one with number 50 to 79.
And you're not going to have those guys on a
most
punt team.
Punt teams don't
unless
have.
they're the elephants, like the 3 guys in the back or something like that. Yeah.
Most teams don't have. They don't have that on the line. And so they should have explained it. Here's why they could do that. And to your point, if an official you explain to an official what you're going to do. This has happened my entire career. This happens all the time. Even sometimes you don't run a play, you still make sure, hey, just so you know, we're going to do this, and right. Yep. I know. Well, some people don't like what I'm going to talk about, but we used to have this thing when I was a coach in Muhlenberg where we would have sort of this boom motion, where our fullback would just take off running before the snap. So we would talk to the officials about it because you think it's a false start, because if you're a fullback and you start going downhill, it's a penalty. But he would literally take off straight sideways. It was my job to make sure he knew, if anything, you go backward.
Yeah, right.
But you go straight sideways. And so we would talk to officials about it. And there was only one time we ever had an officiating crew through a penalty on that, because the opposing coach talked him into it. And that's what I think happened in this game, which is why the flag was so late. I think Tony Elliott talked them into calling that flag.
I don't doubt it.
I mean, that's good for Tony Elliott. He's fighting for his team, but it's just a horrible job. And I have never seen Marcus Freeman that mad, ever, that mad. And the best part about it, I thought the defense came out on that next series super freaking pissed. Like, that was actually almost the worst thing that could have happened to Virginia at that moment. Because if you think about it, Vince, it was 14-0 with 3 minutes left.
Yes.
And Notre Dame was not playing great.
No, that's why you call me greedy for wanting 2 more touchdowns.
Right. They were not playing great. And when Notre Dame came out and they had to give them the ball back, the Notre Dame defense was super pissed.
Yep.
I mean, they were coming off the line hard. They were playing aggressively. They were pounding people. Leonard Moore, breaks up a pass. I mean, they were playing angry football at that point in time.
Yeah.
Which is why, you saw that team, you saw them, kind of put that game away real fast. Like Anthony Calandria runs, he gets smacked by Heinisch and Riley Leonard, 3rd down. Don Schuler steps in front of it and picks it off. I mean, it was like they were mad. And you kind of love to see that kind of thing where, boy, that's a good sign that you're mad about something and you don't let it bother you. Matter of fact, you use it as fuel to say okay, it's time for you to go away now.
I think
what I mean.
We talked about the fact that the team was ready to play and all of those things, and and you're in the game flow and look, Notre Dame was not executing on offense the way that they should have executed on offense, right? After that first, they had a short field, obviously, that, got on the 25-yard line, go and score, but your next 4 possessions are all punts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they score a touchdown, but then they punt again. And it's like, okay, they're not vibing really, they're playing hard, but they're not vibing. That whole scenario that we kind of just broke down, you had, the punt fake that got called back. You had the touchdown that got called back. Then you've got the interception, and then you got a touchdown, and then you get an interception. And like that whole series, definitely woke up Marcus Freeman. Yeah. Not that he was sleeping, but got fired. He got fired up, and he's a player's coach. We talked about this a bajillion times. They're going to feed off of his energy. They do it all the time. They fed off that, that whole sequence of events changed the outcome of this game because anybody wearing a gold helmet at that point was ticked off, and it showed on both sides of the football, right? For the rest of that half, they were dominant because they were ticked off. Like, how dare you call back those touchdowns? How dare you try to throw the ball when we're just going to pick you off? All of those different things. Freeman's ticked off about it. And he apologized, in the post game and all that. But I'm like, don't apologize.
He shouldn't have.
You got your whole team fired up. That's exactly
your
what
job
you
is. And your job is to fight for your team.
Yes.
That is your job. Your job is to fight for your team.
Players know it. And they know if you're fighting for them or they know if you're fighting for yourself. And there's a difference. Okay, we've seen coaches here that fight for themselves. Marcus Freeman fights for his players. And it's so clear to me. And he didn't even put his headset back on, I think, for the rest of the first half. He was so ticked off, and his players responded. That's what you need. And it fired them up, right? They weren't playing terrible, right? They were playing, but they went to another level. And I think that sequence of events was really key.
What's wild is Vince What's wild is they almost scored 3 times.
I know.
Because they had the 2 picks that got him the ball for the first 2 touchdowns in the last 2 minutes and 20 seconds, I think is what it was. They had the 2 picks that set up the 2 touchdowns. Then Xavier Watts picked the guy off again at midfield with 18 seconds left.
That's right.
And honestly, if the O-line would have done a little better job protecting, I thought there was somebody open on a couple of those throws, but they got in field goal range at that point in time.
Yeah.
And then Mitchell Evans had that ball go off his hands, where if he catches that tip ball,
they score a touchdown.
Brother, he walks into the end zone because both of those UVA guys fell down.
I think he was shocked that it hit him in the hands because the 2 UVA guys jumped up and they were going to tip it down and whatever. And it hit him in the hands. I think he was about as surprised as anybody in the stadium that the ball hit him in the hands. And so he just didn't react quick enough to actually catch it.
And I don't count that as a drop because it kind of hit him on the bottom of his hand.
Completely agree. Yeah.
It was tipped. It was a drop, but it's not a drop. You get what I'm saying? So
100%. But yes, they score a touchdown there if he catches that ball, and it's a completely different ball game, and we don't see a 52-yard field goal attempt either.
That's right. Well, Vince, I think that's going to do it for this segment. So, folks, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. And, of course, if you haven't done so, make sure you sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. We got Keys to Victory Revisited coming up next.
All right, Brian, let's talk about the offense. And we're going to jump into the offensive keys to victory.
The whole show, haven't you, Vince?
What's that?
You've been waiting to put yourself in the lead guy role the whole time.
It's the bird dog seat, man. I'm just used to it. All right. I'm used to being on the left. All right. We're gonna revisit the offensive keys to victory that Brian and Trevor, I believe it was Brian and Trevor this week. We're talking about earlier in the week going into the game.
And Ryan.
It was Ryan there too. Okay. I thought that was true. I couldn't remember which show he joined you guys on. Okay. So the three amigos on the afternoon show talked about the offensive keys to victory. So we're going to revisit those, give our great movie though, right? Great movie. We're going to give our thoughts as to whether they accomplished that key or whether they did not accomplish that key. And if you watch this show with any kind of consistency, you know what the offensive key to victory is, and it's start fast. And I would say that last week we finally got to give them a plus, and that is not going to happen today, I don't believe. But go ahead, Brian, with your thoughts on the starting fast.
No, I mean, we don't need to waste a lot of time on that. They got that first touchdown on a short field. It was
25-yard line.
One thing I did like about this game, which I talked about earlier, is I thought the red zone pass game was pretty decent, like with the play action stuff. You know, you had the touchdown to Cooper Flanagan on that play, and then the little bunch route with the sort of the reverse, the under route by Jaden Harrison. But I mean, first drive, you're thinking, 7-0, they're going to roll. They didn't really threaten after that. You know what I mean? They didn't really threaten after that. It was a very poor first half from the offense. It was, they've been close to, like Florida State wasn't great, but it was great, but it wasn't bad. This is a rough first half of the offense. Just, for the most part, O-line didn't get a lot of push. I am going to talk about one of the O-linemen. I was going to do it last segment, but I'll do it this segment instead. Yeah, it was just one of those things, Vince, where I just was not. It was a bad job. I didn't like they came out with no tempo, which I thought was a mistake.
We'll talk about that too. They
weren't real aggressive, which and just all those things kind of factored into the fact to the reality of this. This is one of their worst first half performances in a while. Now they finished well and they took advantage of two short fields and put the ball in the end zone. I'll say that's the one thing the offense did a really good job of in the first half is they couldn't put together long drives, partly because they had, didn't get a lot of help from the officials and some drops. I mean, some of it was their own fault. Some of it, it was actually, they're all their own fault because I shouldn't have said that because of the officials. Because the 78-yard touchdown pass was a legitimate penalty. That was a legitimate penalty that brought that back. So self-inflicted wounds, those type of things. But but what they did was, however, when they got short fields, they got touchdowns. And you got to give them that. You had the interception or the muffed kickoff at the beginning, got him the ball. What was it, like the 25? Punched it in. You get the ball at the 3 after the Adon Schuler pick, punch it in. You get the ball after the Leonard Moore pick. And you weren't like sitting there right on the goal line. You had to make some plays to get in there. They did. And they got the touchdown. So as bad as it was, Vince, and this is definitely a minus, the one thing I do want to give them credit for in this game was the fact that when they were given the ball by the defense or special teams, they played good, complementary football and put that sucker in the end zone. And I think that's something that you can go out there and say, hey, job well done. And at least in that regard, Vince. It's about it. Positives in the first half of that game, really in the entire game.
Overall was not a thing.
That
is definitely the case. So let's talk about key to victory number 2. And you kind of touched on this a little bit, and you had push the tempo, and that was not really something that took place. There was a certain point, I think it was in the second half. I think it was actually after you left, Brian. I leaned over to Trevor. Was like, "Oh, they're kind of going a little bit faster here," and it was surprising because that had not happened the entire game up to that point. So, this is a pretty easy one as well.
Minus, and the reason that it's not that I like tempo. Tempo's fun. You should do tempo because it works. It's more of this is when your offense has been at its best, has been when you've gone with some rhythm, number one. And number two, you were a much faster team than Virginia, and I felt tempo would have given you a better chance of going at that and attacking them. And so, Notre Dame never got into any rhythm, and you kept waiting. Okay, well, they're not in rhythm, so now is when Coach Denbrock's going to push the tempo and really get this thing rolling, and it just never happened. And I kept waiting on it, and it just never happened. So, I go the minus on this, and it matters. It's sometimes like a key to victory is like it's not that important. Yeah, it's a minus, not that important, They didn't run. They got to get 200 yards on the ground. All right, they didn't because they threw for 370. So it's a minus, but it's really not a bad thing because something else worked really well.
Yeah,
I think not doing this is something that impacted the results. I think as they were struggling early and not able to get into a rhythm, I felt that was especially a time when they should have really pushed the tempo, get Virginia on its heels. Tempo meaning not only speed getting up to the line, but also tempo to me is get lined up, do some motions, do some movement, snap the ball quickly, and get them on their heels. And they never really did that.
Yeah.
And I felt like that was something that kept the offense from taking that next step.
Right. And statistically, the offense was good, right? I mean, I think I texted you at the end of the third quarter. I was like, Notre Dame's got 411 yards of offense at this point, and it's like, but it didn't feel that way. You know what I mean? That's why I texted you that, because it was like, it doesn't really feel like that, but it's like they can play kind of a sloppy game and still rack up over 400 yards of offense in 3 quarters.
448 and averaged over 6 yards per play, right?
Yeah. Crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
This is where I think perspective, again, continues to be lost on some.
Agreed. Completely.
The offense isn't average. You're not average when you have 448 yards of offense. You're not average when you're doing that. You're not. They were sloppy.
Yeah.
This is not an average offense. This is an offense that over the last 8 games is averaging over 42 points a game.
Mm-hmm.
You don't do that over that course of time because you're average. You just don't. And so that's where I say sometimes sometimes people will say things that are so over the top that you leave me defending something that I don't want to defend.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And the offense did not play well yesterday. There's no defense of that. But then jumping off the cliff and saying, hey, this is a bad offense, or this is an average offense, or this offense can't do this or can't do that. Did you watch Texas yesterday against Arkansas? A team that Ole Miss probably could have scored 90 on if they wanted to, like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, did you watch Ohio State struggle for a little while against Northwestern on Saturday? Scored less points against Northwestern than Notre Dame scored against Virginia. Virginia's a better team than Northwestern. Like, that's the thing. It was a bad performance. Let's not try to turn it into something that it wasn't, as if, well, this is who they are. No, it's not. Just stop. This was a bad. They had a really sloppy game and still scored 35 points and had 448 yards of offense and missed 2 field goals and turned it over on downs at the 5-yard line. It was sloppy. They got to clean stuff up.
Yeah, for sure.
No doubt.
Yeah.
And you don't like that late in mid-November. But let's not turn it into something that it wasn't, because there's a lot of teams that you could say that about.
Yes.
On Saturday.
Correct. And a lot of teams.
Because I got somebody say, well, if you play like that against good teams, you're going to get beat. I'm like, well, it depends. Are you playing Texas yesterday and you play the way you did against Virginia and they play the way they did against Arkansas? Because I like Notre Dame in that matchup. Are you going to play the way you did yesterday? Ohio State's going to play the way they did against Nebraska or against Northwestern yesterday? Because that's a dogfight that Notre Dame could kind of be in on.
Or how Oregon played against Wisconsin.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, exactly. I mean, we could kind of do this all day, right?
Yeah, correct.
So just let's correct the mistakes.
Yeah.
Look at what was good. Look at what was not good. And don't do it again next week. And that's why the drops are so concerning, Vince, because that's the one thing that we've seen sort of consistently rear its ugly head the last 3-4 games. in my opinion. And that's the one thing that does have me concerned, because this isn't just a bad, like some of the things, Riley's been reading the defense a lot better lately. So I'm not, we'll do better against Army.
Sure.
Some of the other things, I thought Pat Coogan had a rough game coming off of probably the best 3-game stretch of his career. I'm not going to lose sleep over it.
Right.
Emil Wagner had a not typical Emil Wagner game in pass pro. Okay, but it's not typical. The drops are a trend. And that's the one thing that had me a little bit concerned, Vince. But that's where I think sometimes pushing that tempo a little bit can kind of get you rolling.
It's fair. Yeah, no, that's absolutely fair. Third key to victory, make it a space game. And what you mean by that is obviously spreading the ball, spreading things out, getting to the sideline. Don't just use the middle of the field, use the entire width of the field.
Nope. I didn't think they did it very good. I thought a lot of it was just right down the middle. I mean, just
Yes,
again, another minus, just a lot of inside runs, slow development stuff. No quick. I mean, you had a couple tunnel screens, but not a lot. Not a lot of really well designed tunnel screens. Some of them were like on 3rd and 18, and
and they were, the two screens that I remember very well. One went to Bo Collins and one went to Deion Colsey, and it was like, I feel like you've got better options for those. But
Deion did a great job on that. I mean, he almost got the first down on that.
Listen, he got caught from behind. That's my only issue, and it has nothing to do with Deion. Right. It's just like
that's not his game.
If you gave that to Faison, I don't think he gets caught from behind. You might score on that. Or Harrison. Maybe. Greathouse was hurt at that point. But, if you give it to those other guys, I think maybe you score. Like, that was my only issue with
Love,
those.
Or Price. Right.
You nailed it. Right. So, that was my only – and it's nothing against Deion. That's just not his game, per se. But he still got real close to the first down because it was 3rd and long. I remember that one. But yeah, that was my only issue with that. I was like, why are you throwing screens to your 6'5" guys? Like, interesting choice. But okay.
Right. Which I'm good with on first down.
Sure.
I am. There's times there's a couple times early they would throw screens to Bo on first down because, you get 6-7 yards and that's the look that was there. That's fine. But like the 3rd and long screens to Bo were like, you're like, hey, let's get Bo the ball here. Maybe they were going for element of surprise. I don't know. Somebody in the chat said Deion Colsey's waking up. Good to see. I mean, sure. But can we be honest about something? I get that Deion Colsey's apparently not a really good practice player because he, that's always kind of the reason. But can we also acknowledge that every time Deion Colsey has ever been put on the field and thrown the ball, he makes plays? Can we also acknowledge that?
Yeah, it's true.
So
it's absolutely true. No, that's absolutely
it is
true.
What it is.
The only issue, because you said on first down it's good. I completely agree with that.
It's because it's like an extension. It's an RPO. You gain 6, and it's a 6.
But when it's 3rd and 16 or whatever it was, it's like you almost need. You're gonna have to make at least one move. Like it's not going to be clean sailing to a first down on a play like that. You're gonna have to make one guy miss, or you're gonna have to outrun a guy, or something along those lines. And it's like I feel like there's other guys that could do that. So either way, but I agree with you that they did not use the width of the field the way. In a manner that they should have, and they've got dudes that can do that. And I think maybe that was a philosophical idea for a game plan idea for this week. I don't know, but I feel like they've done it in the past, and so I feel like it's in there. Just need to make sure that it happens more often. The last offensive key to victory, number 4, is take your shots.
I give them a plus on this because I felt they did. I mean, you had the bomb early to Jordan Faison. You had the 78-yard pass. I mean, that was clearly with the attempt of taking a shot. There was a couple other plays where I felt they had deep plays called and Riley just went away from it. So in that regard, I felt with the pass game, they because that was the point. It wasn't to hit big plays. It like the 76-yard run. It was to take shots to generate it with the pass game. So I give them a check for that one. I mean, the success wasn't great. So that's, because you had the penalty that called the one back. Sure. Riley double hitched on the go ball to Jordan Faison where he should have just
short.
So, just take the gather, hitch, throw. He gather, hitch, throw. So by that point in time, Jordan had outran his arm a little bit, where if he would have gathered, hit, throw, maybe he hits him a little bit on stride and it's a big play. So I thought there were some opportunities there for big plays that Riley just either didn't hit or he had the penalty that took back the one that was, the great throw, and a couple he didn't read well. So I'll give him a plus for this one. Give him a plus for this one. Before we move on to the defense, Vince, I did want to do sort of we do a brief. Did you learn something from watching the film? And I did want to have one comment from this.
Okay.
I didn't think the O-line played well watching it live. And overall I was correct. I thought Pat Coogan had a rough game.
Yep.
Stopped his feet way too much. Got ahead of his skis a little bit, way too much. Reverted to some old techniques that I thought he'd kind of worked past a little bit the last 3 games. Just kind of had a step back there. I thought Anthony Knapp, again, had a typical Anthony Knapp game. Pretty decent in the run game. Really struggled in the pass game, both with speed and with power rushes, I felt, which affected Billy Schrauth, and I want you to talk about that here in a second. Emil Wagner, good in the run game, had some pass pro issues. I thought his technique getting out into his kick slide with some edge rushes was a little late, and his hands he wasn't real physical with his hands, got beat a couple times. But I'll say this, I thought he played well live. Breaking down the film, I believe this is the best game Rocco Spindler's ever played in Notre Dame uniform. I really do. I thought Rocco was outstanding in this game, Vince. I thought he was physical. I mean, Rocco's Rocco, right? So Rocco's not going to come off the line and just drive his feet and blow guys. I mean, he's going to kind of play bully ball a little bit, and I would still love to see him, maybe move his feet a little bit more and not just try to like he tries to bench press guys too much, right? Like he tries to hit and then bench him off of them, and he can because he's really strong. I'd like to see him get his hips into it and, just keep driving his feet through contact, but he was getting a really good push yesterday, Vince. I thought he was fundamentally sound for the most part. Assignment sound for the most part. He had a couple, had one play where I thought he got a little bit overextended and went down. He had one pass pro where he stopped his feet and the guy got into his chest and kind of drove him back a little bit. But outside of that, I thought Rocco was really good. He was real physical in the run game. I thought he played a very big role in some of the big runs they had. And, and he's been playing really good football lately, in my opinion. But I thought Saturday was the best game that Rocco has played so far in the Notre Dame uniform. And if you look at the double team him and Emil Wagner had on that long run, they were double teaming the D tackle. And then Emil did a really nice job of coming off and getting to the safety as he came down. Jonas Sanker stepped down and Emil came off and got to him. But then Rocco finished off the D tackle. Got a little grabby, so just want to be careful there, but didn't get called for it. I didn't think he should have been called for it. But that was a big play by him and Emil, and he had several blocks like that. So I thought this was probably Rocco Spindler's best game, and it's certainly the best stretch of football he's played. I said, I was talking to somebody before the show, you could make a case that coming out of the bye week, since the first bye, that Rocco Spindler has been their most consistent lineman, if not their best lineman. I think you can make that case since the Louisville game. Since the Stanford game. I think you could say that. And I thought Saturday was his best performance, in my opinion.
I know the part you wanted me to talk about was the other side of the offensive line. And it was, we've been lauding what Billy Schrauth is able to do and how he's the most talented lineman. And those things are all true. Didn't have a great game in this one. Made some mistakes. But one thing I noticed this week, and Brian, you'll have to tell me if I was just missing it before. Maybe that's the case. But for whatever reason, today, as I was watching the film again, it was staring me in the face and I couldn't unsee it. Like once you see something, it's like you can't unsee it. I noticed that with Billy Schrauth moving from right guard to left guard, remember he started the season at right guard. Now he's at left guard as he comes back from his injury because Rocco is playing well. Made perfect sense. Totally agree with the move. And then you're putting him next to Anthony Knapp, who's a rookie who has struggled at times in this season, right? And so you want that veteran presence there. Obviously he doesn't have a ton of experience in Billy Schrauth, but, he's a better player. He still has more experience in the system, et cetera, et cetera. So what I noticed was run game, they're doing their thing. They're focused on what their assignment is. When I say they, I mean the left side of the line. They're doing their thing. We've never really had a massive issue with Anthony Knapp in the run game. It's why he got the job in the first place. It's always been in the pass game. And what I noticed is that Billy Schrauth is very focused on what's happening to his left. He's very focused on what's happening with Anthony Knapp. almost to a detriment of his own game and the game of Coogan to his right, because he ignores what's going on with Coogan, because every single pass drop, he's looking to his left. He's looking to his left to make sure that Anthony's doing okay. And there was one time where it was early on in the game is when Riley got just absolutely hammered by the defensive tackle. He had his eyes to the left, and he kind of did a little push with his right hand on his assignment, but then went over to help Knapp with his assignment, and his guy got through. And it's like, if you just would have stayed on your guy and trust that Anthony's going to be able to do his job, then everything would have been fine. Now, do I think that that is all Billy Shrout's fault? I do not. And this is Vince now talking. Like, this is me looking at the situation and thinking that this is probably why that this is happening. I think he's being told, hey, man, you are the veteran here. You need to make sure that Anthony's doing what he's supposed to do, and you need to help him out if he's struggling, because we need our left tackle to be a left tackle, and we need Riley to not have to worry about what's happening on his blind side. And so with you there now, we need you to focus on not only what you're doing, but then also what Anthony's doing, and make sure that he is, carrying the water and doing what he's supposed to do in pass pro. And so I think he has really taken that to heart, and he's trying to be a good leader. He's trying to be a good teammate. I'm not knocking him for it, but I'm noticing that that is kind of his primary worry right now, is what's going on to his left, as opposed to what he needs to focus on and be a good guard that helps also the center and, does some different things. And so, again, it's not in the run game. He's still double teaming with Coogan. He's still double teaming with Anthony. He's doing what he's supposed to do in the run game, and they're doing their thing. It's in pass pro. And that worries me moving forward if it continues, because Billy's a really good guard, and I'm hoping that he can kind of figure it out and still be the sounding board and help out Anthony, but also take care of his job first and foremost, because that's what we always talk about, right? It's when you start worrying about other people's responsibilities that you don't take care of your own. And that's what I need Billy to do. If I ever talk to Billy, that's what I would tell him. It's like, hey, man, worry about you first. Then you can help your guy. You can help your teammate. So
you're giving him the oxygen mask on a plane advice.
Yeah.
Put your 100%. Own mask on first, then you can,
Yeah, absolutely. So he was even
breaking that down.
Yeah, no problem. And one other thing, he was even helping out at times when I don't think Anthony needed the help.
Yeah,
that's the other thing.
I agree.
You know what I mean?
He went chasing to help.
Yeah, and I don't think he needed it. Yeah,
I didn't notice that at first, Vince. To be honest with you, I just thought. I noticed that Billy had a rough game.
Yeah,
but it wasn't until you pointed that out, and I looked back, I was like, dude, I kind of see it now. So
yeah, it's like once you see it, you can't unsee it. You know what I mean?
No, you're right. You're right. Right.
But yeah, I think Billy is going to be fine. But it's just one thing I noticed watching the film back.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, guys, that's going to do it for our offensive look back at the keys to victory. So make sure you hit that like button, that subscribe button, that notification bell, share with your family and friends. And, of course, jump on the boards.irishbreakdown.com. There's all kinds of great stuff going on over there. There's going to be some, video breakdowns and all that good stuff as well. And obviously, recruiting nuggets and all of that. So best bang for your buck, boards.irishbreakdown.com. Make sure you get on over. Brian, let's keep this thing a-chugging, and let's talk about the defense and your defensive keys to victory and what they entailed, and whether, Notre Dame did what they needed to do on the defensive side of the football. What are you laughing at?
No, number one is going to be we're going to start off with a bang.
Okay, all right. Number one, okay. Number one, harass Anthony Calandria. Can I just repeat what his stat line was real quick?
Yeah, please.
Excuse me. So Anthony Calabria, before he got benched, 8 of 21, 69 yards, 3 interceptions, 38% completion percentage, and a 37.1 rating. Go.
This is it's a plus. I don't know that you could have done a better job than this. And it was really in a couple different areas, Vince. It was not only, obviously from a passing standpoint, it was phenomenal. He went, like I said, what was his let me pull up his my stat sheet here real quick. All right, let me got the box score here, Mr. D'Addario. Just let me pull this up here real fast. All right, downloads, box score. Where is my box score? Is it on the front page? All right, I don't have the box score in front of me, Vince. I don't know where the box score went. His rushing number, his overall stat line from the game.
Oh, so he had 4 rushes for 23 yards.
Yeah, so he went 8 of 21 passing.
Yes.
38.1% completion. His previous career low was 56.8, so almost 20 points below. 3.3 yards per pass attempt. His previous low there was 5.3, so full 2 yards lower than he's ever had. He's always been a kid that's been a little bit injury prone, but he hasn't thrown 3 interceptions since his second career start back in September of 2023 because he's a true sophomore. Hit him a lot, harassed him a lot. He didn't really do a ton as a runner. He had a couple scrambles here. He had one nice long run, but he was harassed a lot. He was missing he was missing a couple open receivers, sailed a screen route because he was just panicked. The interceptions, he's locking in on guys because he knows I don't have a lot of time. They confused him. He thinks the guy's open, but he doesn't know that there's a safety squeezing down from the other. He never saw LaDon Schuler. Just never saw him. Xavier Watts baited him into a play, and we talked about he's a 6-foot quarterback, and there's a play where they got a screen play coming open, Vince, and if he gets that ball over, it might go.
Yeah.
But Riley Mills is coming up. Riley does a great job of just getting his paws up, forces the kid to have to throw a 6-foot quarterback.
Yeah.
Because and here's why that matters. If I'm 6 feet and you're 6'5", and I've got to throw over a 6'5" guy, your trajectory as a 6'5" quarterback over that guy is going to be a little bit better than me having to get it up and then down, where you can just kind of drop it over top, it goes right, and then can kind of come down. And just, that forced a mistake. And they harassed this poor kid the entire game.
Oh, he was probably happy to be subbed out at that point.
Oh, yeah. It was, yeah. I mean, Riley Mills had 6 pressures. According to Pro Football Focus, Riley Mills had 6 more pressures in the game. Wow. Bryce Young had 2 pressures. Armel Mookum had a couple. Donovan Heinisch had a couple. I mentioned yesterday I thought this was R.J. Oben's best game of his career. It was very strong performance, Vince. Very, very strong performance. And just, kind of talking about the kind of stretch and the kind of year that Riley Mills is having. If you look at the Pro Football Focus numbers, Vince, in the first 5 games of the year, he had 8 total pressures and 4 hits plus sacks on the quarterback. In the last 5 games, he's had 22 pressures in the quarterback, and he's had 8 hits plus sacks in the quarterback. And in fact, if you look at his numbers and compare him to last year, in 535 snaps, this year he's played 424. Last year, for the entire season, 13 games, he had 32 pressures, and he had 12 hits plus sacks on the quarterback. This year, in 10 games, he already has 30 pressures, and he's already matched his hits plus sacks on the quarterback. And he's got more sacks, over two times as many sacks as he had last year. And he continued that again on Saturday. You're right. So next man in is not always about who replaced him. And I thought Donovan Heinisch had a very good game in replacement. But it's also about your other dudes got to step up. So Howard's out. Riley, we need you to step up. Not only does Donovan need to step up, but we need you to raise your level of play.
Yeah.
And if you look at how disruptive Riley Mills has been from the moment that Howard Cross went down, that's exactly what he did. My dude's down. My guy's down. I got to step up. It's not I'm not putting this on Donovan. Donovan, you don't got to go play like an All-American to replace Howard. I'm going to go play like an All-American. You just go do your job. And Donovan's done his job and done it well. And then that makes it easier for Donovan to do his job when the other team's like, we got to try to figure out a way to block 99. You know what I mean? Because he's a bit of a monster. So he's just playing at such a high level right now, Vince. Just incredibly high level. And
agreed.
But yeah, they I mean, plus on this one. They were incredibly disruptive to this kid.
Yes, completely agree with that. Yes, plus.
And let's just quickly tie in number 4 here real quick too, Vince, because number 4 was inefficiency in the pass game, and they kind of tied together. So let's just go ahead and bring that one up real fast. So we don't need to get into it a whole lot. I mean, obviously Notre Dame was incredible when it came to creating inefficiency in the pass game. And the point was that, Vince, is if they can't get their pass game going, they have no chance.
Right.
and they completed 47.2% of their passes, 4.8 yards per attempt. Their lowest this season from a completion percentage standpoint as a team was 56.8 against Maryland. So you're almost 10 below. And their lowest yards per attempt on the season so far was 6.1. Notre Dame held them to 4.8. And I'm looking actually the last time they were lower than 4.8 was the beginning of the opener last year against Tennessee. They were at 4.4. That was also the last time they went below 50% completion percentage. So, yeah, I mean, inefficiency in the pass game, no touchdowns, 3 interceptions. I don't know how much more inefficient you can create that. And Malachi Fields had 4 catches for 81 yards, and I pointed this out last night, but it was on 8 targets. So, yeah, he got his yards, and honestly, the big play he made should not have counted. He never had full possession of that ball when Christian Gray stripped it out. That should have been incompletion. So even that big play shouldn't have counted, in my opinion. But 1 and 4 went together, Vince, and they were both definite pluses.
All right. So 1 and 4. Yep. And honestly, 2 is kind of an extension, but we'll jump right into 2. Your number 2 was win on the edge, and I assume that means defensive ends.
Yeah, blitz pressures. They were okay here. I give them a check.
Okay.
They weren't as good as I would have liked. I thought that they were better against the run than they were against the pass. To be honest with you, I was not super thrilled with, I just expect them to be a little bit more dominant on the edge, and they weren't. But I think Virginia also spent a lot of time trying to protect their edge a little bit, which is partially what made them so, in my opinion, susceptible to getting beat up the middle. And Notre Dame's two starting defensive tackles combined for 8 pressures and then 2 hits plus sacks on the quarterback. So I thought that, and Donovan Heinrich had 4 run stops in the game, which led the defense. So I thought they dominated up the middle. They were good on the edge. They just weren't great on the edge, Vince. And so I gave them they should have been better. I thought they'd be better. The tackles were struggling coming into this game in pass pro, and I didn't think the edge players did a great job beating them with the kind of consistency that they should have. But they made up for it because of how dominant the interior guys were.
Fair enough. The third defensive key to victory was be prepared for the running back pass game, specifically Xavier Brown out of the backfield.
Did a great job with that.
I mean, I don't think he had a catch.
No, he didn't. And there were pass plays called for him. There was one play I was watching where, Drake Bowen steps down like looked like he was about to trigger, and the running back did a free release, and Drake just peeled off perfectly and just went and got him. You could tell there was a couple times they were trying to run some plays to get him the ball, and Notre Dame just was all over it. And so I thought they did a great job with that, and obviously limited the run plays. They didn't have a lot of success running football. I mean, heck, their longest run of the game, I believe, I'm going to have to look up the box score, but I believe their longest run of the game was that scramble late in the game that I think got them their first touchdown, right?
Yeah.
Was, I believe, their longest play of the game. Let me go look at the box score. Longest run of the game was 18 yards by Tony Muskett. That was the touchdown. So, I mean, they did a great job of really keeping the running backs from making any kind of impact. Xavier Brown had 11 carries for 52 yards, and their running backs had a grand total of, looks like, 0 catches. Yeah, no catches in the game. Yeah. So I thought they did a very good job. Well, their backup running back caught a pass late in the game against them, but the starters did nothing. So I didn't think Virginia did a very good job of doing some things with motion to get their backs involved, which is something that's hurt Notre Dame. But overall, Notre Dame shut it down. There's the only mistake they really made was they ran that quick pitch play and they got sealed inside and the corner didn't see it, and they were able to pop it outside for a big play. It's the only really play the running backs made all day, and that was more of Notre Dame not reacting properly to it than it was anything else, in my opinion. So I give them a check.
Yeah. So thoughts on the defense overall? I mean, we're talking about the keys to victory, obviously, and more often than not, they get pluses and checks for all of them based on what they've been doing, especially the last 8 games or so. But your thoughts overall on the defense, how they looked, are they still ascending at this point? Are they kind of settled in? Like, you know what I mean? Like, are they ready to are they ready for playoff football? Basically, I guess is what I'm getting at defensively.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about the defense, right? I mean, they are what they are. I mean, and Saturday was a perfect example. They are what they are. This is just who they are. I mean, we talked about it last night, Vince. They had 300. Virginia only had 300 yards of offense in this game, and 80 of that came on the last drive of the game against the backups.
I was going to say, yeah.
I mean, it was literally an 80-yard drive,
right,
and completely shut them down. And you take that drive away, and I mean, like they never really threatened until that drive in the third quarter, where Notre Dame was already up 35-0. They didn't have the same level of intensity. The crowd wasn't as into it, as understandably so. It's 35.
Well, and they were leaving, like they were.
Yeah, I know. Like, anymore. Well, I left because like usually you leave early to go do the post game show, but Vince stayed and he helped. He'd help Trevor kind of.
First of all, maneuvered. Awesome spending time with Trevor. It's the first time that I've met Trevor in person, and like. I mean, this is going to sound corny as hell, and I don't care. We vibe big time. Like, I really enjoyed just hanging out with Trevor and just like, after you left, he moved over. So he was sitting next to me and we were talking about the game and we were having fun. And like, then we go down on the field and we're discussing. And Angela came over actually, and she's like, Trevor, you want your picture taken down here. He's like, yeah, I kind of do.
She's like,
that, yeah. She's like, give me your phone.
Like so the boss's wife is doing it. I can't say no.
It was great. It was great. And I said this to you last night as well. It's like seeing all of what I take for granted because I've literally been doing this for 20 years, going on the field, the end of the games and things like that. I haven't done it in a while, but like, I'm used to it. But seeing it through his eyes, doing it for the first time, like I was like a dad. Like I was, but so it's so much fun hanging with Trevor and going to the post-game press conference and doing all that stuff. So thank you, by the way, for letting me do that. And you kind of taking my role last night. And I think it was worth it. I think it was worth it for all parties. So thank you for that. Appreciate it very much.
Anyway.
Yeah, sorry. Went off on a tangent.
Stuff. I don't like all that sappy stuff. I'm just kidding. But no, I mean, it was so I left early. That's the point. So I was going to go home and start the show, and Vince was going to finish the game. And of course, I'm watching them. Looking, I'm like, dude, there's a lot of people leaving right now.
Yeah.
Like, I was honestly a little disappointed. I was like, you guys are Notre Dame. And it was Notre Dame fans. I'm like, where are you guys going? Yeah. It's not that cold.
Well, there weren't a lot of Virginia fans there. Yeah. Like the Virginia section was very not populated.
Because it's not a basketball game. It's an ACC school. They don't care about football.
No, that's fair. Actually, that's where the Virginia section, Brian, is where they put all the high school football players that they invited locally.
That would explain why they had that mass amount of tickets, because they were the ones Virginia gave back.
Correct. Yep, that is absolutely correct. Because I saw a bunch of pictures of some of the guys, and you could tell just by the angles that's where they were sitting. And it was like, makes sense now. So yeah. But yeah, it's funny that you say that because a lot of people did leave, but there were still a lot of people in the stadium too. And sometimes it's hard to see because the lights are on, and the lights don't light up the crowd. They light up the field with the new LED lights. They're like very much more like focused on the field itself. And so sometimes it's hard to see the actual crowd. There was still a decent chunk of people there, and they were still fairly loud for the amount of people that were there. And of course, since it was senior day and it was the last home game, none of the students left. Like all the students were there. And I think that definitely helped the sound as well towards the end.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, I'm very interested to see what a home playoff game looks like in that stadium. I don't want that to be my last 24 memory of Notre Dame Stadium. I will say that much. So, but I agree with you. This defense is just continuing to settle in. I mean, they're elite.
If they can somewhat get healthy and get Howard Cross back and get that 3-week rest and be like, I think the defense is going to really benefit from the bye. Like between the regular
couple
season
of weeks in between,
if they're able to handle the business the next 2 weeks.
It's 3 weeks. I think it's 3 weeks, right?
It'll be because there's there's the bye week of championship week, and then it's 2 weeks at the end of championship week. So their season ends November 30th, and the first playoff game that they could potentially play is December 20th.
Yep.
The 20th is the Friday night, and then the 21st is the Saturday. So
with all three of the games, yep.
Yeah, but they could use. I mean, Riley Mills has played a lot of snaps this year, and Howard Cross has played a lot of snaps, and the corners have played a lot of snaps, and so it's like you just get them through these next 2 games healthy. You're going to have 3 weeks to get to rest again and get ready for the playoff. That's going to be big. And unlike a bowl game, you're not going to spend a week down in Florida and hopefully, if they get a home playoff game. Because, again, there's still a lot they got to take care of Army and USC first.
Oh, 100%.
Which is not going to be easy.
And I think they got to do it in a convincing manner, too.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. Right.
Yep. All right. Well, that's going to do it for our revisitation of the defensive keys to the game. Make sure you hit that like button, that subscribe button, that notification bell, share with your family and friends. And, of course, jump on the boards.irishbreakdown.com. Best bang for your buck that's out there if you are a true Notre Dame fan. So make sure you jump on the boards, get all of the info, both recruiting and everything else that we have to offer.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Brian. So this final segment of the show is one that we thought about doing last week, but we had to commit, and so we wanted to talk about that. Obviously, it's very important. But this time, we're going to talk about kind of the Saturday that was. Essentially, we're gonna talk about some games that affected Notre Dame. Okay, and then we're going to talk about the college football playoff rankings, and we're gonna kind of go back and forth. We're going to talk about what we think is going to happen, not what we believe should happen, because those are two very different things. I want to be very clear on that. What I think is going to happen, or what I think should happen, is way different than what I think is going to happen. So we're going to talk about what is going to happen. So what we think the committee is actually going to do on Tuesday night. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the bigger games that took place and how they affected Notre Dame. And they should be fairly obvious, going into this. But the first game that we're going to talk about is Tennessee and Georgia.
Yeah.
And this is a big one. Obviously, it's the SEC. Tennessee's ranked higher than Notre Dame. Georgia is ranked below Notre Dame going into the game. And so with the outcome the way it was, Tennessee loses. Where do they drop? Georgia wins. Where do they rise to? That's the question that is on the table and how it affects Notre Dame.
Because we're going to talk more about the national games, but Notre Dame's strength of schedule was not helped this weekend either. With Louisville losing and then Navy losing was certainly not helped at all. But Army was off, and then USC got a win, which is good. They need to get one more before they go play. But Notre Dame I think Notre Dame is what it is in the committee's eyes. I don't know that there's a whole lot they're going to be able to do to say, oh, all of a sudden they realize Notre Dame's a really good team or not as good as they think, other than their own play. So it really comes down to what happens around them is really what I think the big mover is. The only team that I think Notre Dame could potentially their play could impact is Penn State. And you could maybe talk about that game in a second. But the Georgia Tennessee one is the big one because and this is why I even said it, I believe I wrote this on the message board on Saturday when I did sort of my watch list, the games that Notre Dame fans, the cheering guide for Notre Dame fans. And so, I'm kind of torn on this because if Tennessee wins, it knocks Georgia out, which is good because, there's always that potential that the committee sees something from Georgia that causes them to lose their minds and, convince themselves that Georgia is what they were 3 years ago and not what they actually are. And, there's that. And then, but if Georgia wins and doesn't leap Notre Dame, which I don't think that they will, we'll talk about that, then now all of a sudden that's one more team that may not win because now there's two SEC teams that may be ahead of you with one loss to play in the SEC title game. Because if Tennessee won out, and Texas won out, they'd have played each other. The two UTs would have played each other in the SEC title game.
Yep.
And two 11-1 teams, if they play in a competitive game, and I think it would have been a competitive game, I doubt that 11-2 SEC runner-up that was already ahead of Notre Dame is going to all of a sudden fall behind Notre Dame because Notre Dame beat 6-5 USC and Army, right? I'm not saying that shouldn't be the case. I'm just saying I don't think it will happen. So then that bumps Notre Dame down a spot and maybe puts them in a little bit of a danger zone for getting a home playoff game. With Georgia winning, Tuesday is going to be huge, Vince, because if Georgia's not ahead of Notre Dame Tuesday, they will not move ahead of Notre Dame unless Notre Dame loses.
Right.
Because of what's left. And this is this is where Bama was last week. So last week it was like there was a lot of people worried and kind of paranoid and I guess somewhat understandable for them leaping Notre Dame.
That Alabama leaping Notre Dame, right.
Because of they went out and blew out LSU and big victory and they were kind of hot. They had just blown out Missouri the week before and they're playing really good football, and they are playing very good football. And there was a lot of concern that because their strength of schedule is tougher than Notre Dame's, and it is. I mean, not even just with the whole the SEC stuff, but if you just look at Bama's schedule, their opponents have a better overall record than Notre Dame's. They're one of the very few teams that has more wins over teams with a 500-plus record than Notre Dame. I mean, their resume is legitimately strong. Their schedule's legitimately stronger than Notre Dame. Not the perception of, Penn State's schedule's harder because they play in the Big Ten.
Right.
Bull crap. Their schedule is legitimately harder than Notre Dame's, right?
Right.
Yep, and it's been impressive. They went, Oregon, look what the number one team in the country just went to Oregon this past week and struggled. Should have lost, got outplayed for most of the game. Bama went to that same stadium and beat the bejesus out of Wisconsin earlier in the season, right? So there's this thought that, Bama's hot. Are they going to leap Notre Dame? Well, the fact that not only did they not leap Notre Dame, but there was actually distance put between them and Notre Dame. Bama went from 11 to 10, and Notre Dame went from 10 to 8. When you look at what was left on Alabama's schedule, Vince, they're not leaping Notre Dame at that point in time. It's just not going to happen because beating Mercer and beating Oklahoma and beating Auburn, and your best win of that group could be a 5-5, or what are they now? 5-5, probably going to be 5-7 Oklahoma team. There's just no quality wins that are going to boost you if Notre Dame beats a ranked Army team and a USC team that the polls and the voters really like more than what their record might indicate. So Bama's not leaping Notre Dame. You could argue if they should or shouldn't. That's a different conversation. They're just not going to, unless Notre Dame plays poorly the next two games, right? Now we're talking about that with Georgia. Georgia was 12th. Notre Dame was 8th. Is Georgia going to leap Notre Dame now that they went and beat Tennessee? And it was by 14 points, but it was closer than that. It was a competitive game.
It was until the end.
It wasn't a 2-point touch. It wasn't a 2-score game.
It was back and forth.
Right. It was 17-7 at halftime. Georgia kind of put the game away late. Their last touchdown came with 2 minutes left, and it was a great drive, just a long 90-plus play drive that just put the game away. And Georgia played really well. Now they're 8-2. If they don't leap Notre Dame, and they'd have to go up quite a few spots to leap Notre Dame,
because I don't think Notre Dame's
they don't
falling.
leap Notre Dame, then they're not going to, because they have UMass and Georgia Tech left. And when I say not going to, there's always the exception of if Notre Dame lays an egg against Army and USC and still wins, then there's merit to putting Bama or Georgia ahead of them if they blow out their next couple opponents. But I'm saying if Notre Dame just keeps doing what they're doing, you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So this Tuesday is going to tell us if Georgia's going to leap in front of them. If with Tennessee losing, unless Georgia leaps ahead of Notre Dame this week, then that puts Notre Dame in position to move up to 6th because of that loss.
Yep.
Combined with BYU losing at Kansas. But that one doesn't matter as much. That's more just, hey, we're number 6. The Big 12 champ is going to leap ahead of Notre Dame anyway. It doesn't really matter from a seeding standpoint. Same with the ACC. So right now, with the Big 12 team losing, Vince, and now all the Big 12 teams and all the ACC teams are ranked ahead of Notre Dame, behind Notre Dame. Yeah. Notre Dame's got to be 6 or higher to host a home playoff game.
Correct.
If they're 7, they get leaped. They drop down to 9. So they've got to, at the end of the year, they got to be 6 or higher because of the Big 12 and the ACC and the potential group of 5.
There you go. I want to throw in that caveat because I don't think it's cemented in stone that the ACC and the Big 12 are going to get the 2.
Agree.
The 3
I think
and the 4.
ACC will. The Big 12 is a little shakier.
Yeah, I think there's a chance that the group of 5, Boise State in this case, could potentially – I think it's a 50-50 shot right now, to be perfectly honest with you. I think right now, the way I kind of laid things out, I think it could either be Colorado or, Big 12 champ, or Boise State could be the 4 or the 12. And that's a big difference. That's a big difference whether you're the 4 or the 12. So obviously one comes with a bye, all of those different things. And so I do think those two are a toss-up. But your point is still solid that there's going to be 2 conference champs that are going to be ranked below Notre Dame. They're going to jump them.
2 of those 3 doesn't really matter.
Doesn't matter. It's going to be 2
of them are going to leap them anyway.
Exactly.
Right. So that's why Georgia winning was a big impact for Notre Dame.
Yes.
And BYU losing doesn't really affect Notre Dame. It doesn't.
It really doesn't.
In regard to the seeding, it affects them in the ranking because they're going to they could potentially move up to 6.
Correct.
And what I mean by that is if Notre Dame moved up to 7 and BYU is at 6 and BYU ran the table, then Notre Dame only gets leaped by one conference champ to and then they'd go to 8.
Right.
That's all that means.
Right.
And if Notre Dame was 8th, let's say, and Miami and BYU were still ahead of them, then they'd stay 8 if the playoff came. But because there's 2 champions that are going to get automatic bids are all below them, and it could be the Mountain West champ, it could be the AAC champ, it could, whatever. But 2 teams are going to leap them when it comes to seeding. So that's why now you got to get to 6 or higher for Notre Dame. And you look at what, we'll talk about what's kind of coming up next, in the show on Tuesday events. But obviously the good news for Notre Dame is there's at least one game between teams ahead of you where they're going to play each other.
Yes, exactly right.
Well, actually, there's a guaranteed 2 games, but one of them is going to be a conference championship game, and it's not guaranteed that a team will fall behind them after a conference championship game.
I think the conference championship games are going to be weighted differently, right? I mean, I think wins and losses in the conference championship will affect seedings, but I don't think it's going to push anybody out if they were
unless
already
they're like right there at 11 and 12.
Yeah, if they were already in comfortably going into the conference championship, I don't think that they fall out.
Like if Ohio State's and Oregon play each other and Oregon smacks Ohio State by 21, I don't think that drops Ohio State out. It would hurt their seeding.
Yes.
They would fall seeding wise, but it doesn't knock them out.
Right. Yeah.
And if, let's say, Georgia gets in and plays Texas in a rematch, and Georgia's 9th or 10th, and Texas beats them in a close game, I don't think that drops Georgia out. They're not going to drop Georgia out and then put Tennessee back in real quick. You know what I mean?
No, I agree with that. Yeah,
now,
I agree
the other thing that's going to be interesting is Bama's the top-ranked SEC school behind Texas. Right? What's interesting is here's where it gets really tricky, Vince, when you talk about kind of the upcoming voting. If you're going to leap Georgia ahead of Notre Dame, you kind of almost also have to put Ole Miss ahead of Notre Dame. Because like the AP and the coaches polls put Georgia ahead of Notre Dame, which is stupid. Like they did this before with A&M and LSU? Remember when A&M smacked LSU and then a week later lost South Carolina? And the AP and the coaches polls both put LSU ahead of A&M. Do you remember that? And then, of course, A&M when it got blasted by Alabama, which I have never enjoyed watching Alabama win more in my life than I did in that game. But the committee kept A&M ahead of LSU before the Bama game. They didn't leap LSU over just because South Carolina beat A&M. I think we're going to see that again. I think what's going to happen is Alabama, Georgia, and Alabama, Ole Miss, and Georgia all go up, and then BYU drops behind all of them, and then Tennessee drops behind all of them. Because the difference here is, I think you could argue that Ole Miss has the worst loss of all those teams, because I think the Ole Miss loss to Kentucky is worse than the Tennessee loss to Arkansas.
Okay.
Bama's losses are both, in my opinion, good losses, because they lost to a Vanderbilt team that's better than Arkansas and better than Kentucky. They beat Kentucky. And then they're 6, I think, they're 6-4 now, Vanderbilt is. So that's better. But then Bama beat Georgia and beat LSU. They didn't play Tennessee. They lost to Tennessee. Tennessee's problem is they've got the great win over Bama, but they've got a worse loss. And they just overall haven't played as well as Alabama. I know they got the head-to-head, but the head-to-head over Bama doesn't matter as much now because you've got this 4 group where Bama beat Georgia, Georgia beat Tennessee, Tennessee beat Georgia, and then Ole Miss beat Georgia. So, that's why I don't see them putting Georgia ahead of those teams, ahead of Notre Dame, because Georgia's lost to 2 of those other teams. So how do you justify putting Georgia ahead of Alabama or Ole Miss when they all have the same record when 2 of those 4 teams beat Georgia? I know that Tennessee beat Alabama, but they've all got one of those. The difference is Georgia has a second one of those in that they lost to Alabama and Ole Miss. And let's be real about something else. Ole Miss kicked the crap out of Alabama or out of Georgia. And Alabama, the only reason that game was close is because Alabama took their foot off the gas. A mistake that I promise you Kalen DeBoer will never make again. They were up 28-0, Vince. If they don't take their foot off the gas, we're not even talking about Georgia being in the playoff right now. because they'd have a 31-point loss to Georgia to Alabama on their resume. Can we be honest about that?
Yeah.
Alabama let them back in that game, and then when Alabama had to, they went back and got it right back at the end and hit Ryan Williams with that big play. So I actually think Georgia, Vince, and I'm curious to I am curious to see. I won't say it because I won't spoil your surprise. I think it's going to be tough to put Georgia ahead of some teams without moving them all up. I think that's what's going to be interesting. And I'm especially curious to see what they do after the Indiana-Ohio State game next week, but that's getting ahead of ourselves.
Don't go there yet.
Yeah.
I think this committee loves Georgia. I do.
Yes,
at the end of the day,
why.
I think they do. I just think that they this is a bit conspiracy theory maybe in my head, but I think, okay, so last week they dropped Georgia, right? And they're like, see, we're not huge SEC homers. We're going to drop Georgia down to 12, and they're the first team out. Knowing full well that Georgia was about to play Tennessee, who they had, ranked in the top 5 or whatever it was, top 6 at the time. And I'm sure they assumed that Georgia was going to win that game, and now they're going to have the excuse to jump Georgia back up a few spots, okay? I think that they're going to have Georgia above those other teams. Mm-hmm. And I that's what I think is going to happen. I agree with literally everything that you just said about why certain teams should be where, who beat who, all of those logical, on paper, there it is. I mean, it's logic, right? But I just feel like at the end of the day, this committee, they love them some Georgia because of they're looking at Georgia, the program, not Georgia, the 2024 football team. And I'm not saying that they're going to put Georgia ahead of Notre Dame because I do not think that is going to happen. But I do think Georgia is going to get some love, and I think they're going to be in the 7 or 8 spot right behind Notre Dame. That's what I think is going to end up happening. Now, I hope I'm wrong because of everything.
And you're not advocating that this is what it should be. You're saying
this
is what they're going to do.
No. Because, everything that you said makes a lot of sense because you're looking at the games that are played, you're looking at the resumes, and you're doing all those things.
That's not it. That's not why. It's also looking at what the committee has done.
Okay.
And I do think the committee likes Georgia a lot because of how tough their schedule is. That's why they were number 3 despite having the loss to Alabama. Because they had to win over Georgia. And I don't think that I think they kind of just brushed off the fact that they barely beat Kentucky and looked like crap against Auburn and looked like crap against Mississippi State and looked like crap against Florida. And honestly, I think would have lost to Florida if DJ Lagway doesn't get hurt. I really do. So to me, when they got smacked by Ole Miss, I think that took some of the shine off of that a little bit. Okay. Because I don't if they wanted to kind of do that with Georgia, they could have dropped Georgia, down to a certain level, and then they could have advocated for, well, here's why Georgia's still ahead of Ole Miss and Alabama because they've got better losses. I mean, they lost to Alabama, they lost to Ole Miss, where those teams have worse losses. Alabama has a loss to an unranked Vanderbilt team. They lost to the team that Georgia just is, I guess you couldn't really use that logic then because they haven't played yet. And then you can say Ole Miss. Well, yeah, Ole Miss gets dinged because they lost to an unranked 3-6 Kentucky team, and also they lost to an LSU team that is now 6-3 and at the bottom, at number 22. And that's the thing that could hurt Ole Miss, Vince, in regard to a way that the committee could get Ole Miss behind Georgia is to say, yeah, you've got that great head-to-head win, but that's your only great win that you have. You lost to 2 unranked football teams now in LSU and Kentucky. That's where I think they could use that to advocate moving them ahead of Ole Miss. I think they're going to have a really hard time moving them also ahead of Alabama because Alabama doesn't have that similar type of resume. Alabama lost to an unranked team, right? Fair. But the other loss they have is going to be to a top 13 team because I think Tennessee still stays in the top 12 to 13. I think Tennessee's basically going to replace Georgia. But I don't think they're going to just flip Georgia and Tennessee. You get what I'm saying?
Okay.
And move. I don't think so. I think they're going to put I will not be shocked if they put Georgia 1 spot ahead of Ole Miss because now Ole Miss's resume took a big hit this weekend with LSU getting beat by Florida, and they're going to now drop out of the top 25. And then, of course, they also lost to Kentucky.
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of where I'm at, Vince, where I think I think the order is going to be either Bama. I'm sorry, they're 4-6 now because they beat an FCS team this weekend, but they got to play at Texas and Louisville to finish the season. So they're going to be at best 6-6, probably 5-7, maybe 4-8. I think there's two options for how they're going to have because I think the 3 SEC teams are still going to be boom, boom, boom. And so you have Tennessee being 9, right? Mm-hmm. You have Georgia 7. You want to just go ahead and give your top 15 real quick, Vince, before I start kind of sharing my thoughts on it? Go ahead.
So usually when I do these rankings, I go kind of by like what I've seen, my gut, and then based on what the committee did last week, and then I try to interpret how they're going to interpret the games that were played, right? So the top 3 don't change. Oregon, Ohio State, Texas. Well, top 5, really. Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, Penn State, IU. That's how they had it last week. I don't see them changing because none of those teams lost and some of them were on a bye, right? So I don't see anything changing there. So the changes begin at number 6. This is where I think Notre Dame slots in. And then right after Notre Dame, this is where I think Georgia's going to get too much of a boost. I've got them at 7. The hardest part for me, Brian, was figuring out where to put Miami, to be perfectly honest with you. Because you said it was going to be SEC teams, 3 boom, 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 right on top of each other. So does that mean that, Miami is going to get bumped behind them, or should they be behind Notre Dame at 7? Like, what is your thought on Miami? That would be my first question coming back to you after I read all this off. So I got Miami at 8. I've got Tennessee at 9, Alabama 10, Ole Miss 11, and then Boise 12. SMU 13, A&M 14, and then Colorado sneaks into the top 15 at 15. So that's my top 15. And then BYU would be right after Colorado.
One thing real quick. I don't see any way that the committee has BYU behind Colorado. Anyway, 2 reasons. Number 1, Colorado has more losses. Colorado has no top 25 wins. There's no way you could argue for Colorado beat ahead if you're looking at overall resume. And I know that they've had some some ugly wins, but Colorado needed a Hail Mary to beat Baylor. I mean, everybody's got those kind of wins. Colorado has a loss to an unranked now, 5-5 Nebraska team. And they also lost to now what will most likely be an unranked Kansas State team at home. And BYU has the worst individual loss to Kansas, but they can counter that by saying, but we also beat SMU on the road. And the other thing, too, is the committee would get hammered for that decision, and you don't need to do that. Just leave BYU right ahead of Colorado and then let that take care of itself.
Yeah, that's fine.
And then if Colorado beats BYU, then you can move them up, and then if they don't, then you can do whatever. So I don't think
either way, the winner of the conference championship is the only one you're worried about anyway, because the second place Big 12 team is nowhere to be found. So
that's right.
Completely agree. You know what? I agree with you on that. That's fine. So BYU 15, Colorado 16. I'm cool with that.
Sure.
Miami, for me.
Yeah, Miami. I don't know what they're going to do with Miami. I would assume that Miami,
I had trouble with that,
right? Because they didn't play anybody, and we've seen teams get dropped. We've seen teams go up with buys, and we've seen teams get dropped with buys. I don't really know what they're going to do with Miami. And when you look at the college football playoff rankings, I mean, last week, Miami fell to 9 above Alabama. Well, what's your justification to move Alabama up now ahead of them when Miami didn't play and Alabama beat Mercer? Well, the thing you could say is, well, the Georgia win now looks even better because Georgia's going to move up the rankings. Fair. But now the Tennessee loss looks worse because now Tennessee's going to fall in the rankings. So I don't know that Alabama's overall resume changes enough to leap Miami. I'll be fine if they do put them ahead of Miami because I think they're a much better team than Miami.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think they've played a far more competitive schedule than Miami. And Miami's had some wins where, honestly, I'm going to ding Miami because the officiating handed them 2 games. One at the very least. Agreed. The Cal game, I think both games. So I'm okay if it's kind of like when BYU and Indiana got put ahead of Tennessee. There was no justification for it, but they corrected it and made it's what it should have been.
Yeah. So
I'm okay if they want to put Bama ahead of Miami.
So just for fun, you're putting a 2-loss team above a 1-loss team because the refs stole a game from Miami.
No.
But what about? I'm not saying it's true, but what about Colorado? They're a 2-loss team. BYU's a 1-loss team, but BYU had a win stolen, away from Utah, given to BYU.
No, I'm not dinging them because they had a win stolen. I'm saying they haven't played well.
Okay.
Right? But now that BYU has a loss, I'm dropping them below Miami.
Right.
I meant drop below my.
I meant BYU versus Colorado, and you're doing Alabama versus Miami. I'm just using your logic on the other ones.
It's not just about losses. It's about wins. You have to have the wins.
Okay.
What's the win for Colorado that you're hanging your hat on right now?
Agreed.
That's what. So more losses in the same league, no wins, where BYU can still say, we beat SMU on the road. SMU's a top 13 team. That's what I'm saying. The difference here is we're talking about two leagues with two completely different schedules. That's the difference here between Miami and there. And my point about Miami having the two games that were handed to them, what I'm saying is I'm dinging them because they haven't played well in a lot of games, in my opinion, Miami. That's where I'm coming from. They haven't impressed me with how they've played. I think Bama's the better team. I think Bama has clearly the better wins. The Bama's worst loss is comparable to Miami's only loss. I think Vanderbilt and Georgia Tech would be ranked really close to each other. If we were going to rank the top 50, they'd be real close to each other. You might maybe put Vanderbilt a little bit ahead, maybe Georgia Tech a little bit ahead. I'd put Georgia Tech slightly ahead. Georgia Tech has better losses than Vanderbilt does. That Georgia State loss still kind of resonates with me, but then you could say, but then Vanderbilt beat Virginia Tech. Georgia Tech lost to Virginia Tech. I mean, there's all types of ways you could do it. They're comparable. But then Bama has that second loss to Tennessee, but Miami hasn't played anybody like Tennessee this season. They haven't played a top 10 team like that. So I'd be okay if they moved Bama ahead, but I'd also be okay if they left Miami and Bama where they were, Vince, because I look at it and say, beating Mercer doesn't necessarily change your schedule or change your resume. And then the boost you get from Georgia winning is negated by the fact that they beat Tennessee, who beat you. You know what I mean? It's kind of like what hurt Notre Dame a little bit is Louisville got beat this weekend, which knocks them out top 25. But who beat them? A team that Notre Dame beat 49-7. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like, okay, they kind of negate each other a little bit. And that's how I feel about Alabama. That's also why I don't think Georgia leaps ahead of Alabama. I think you're going to be hard pressed and you're going to get crushed, I think, by the media if you put Georgia ahead of two teams that beat them, especially since they were convincing in a lot of ways. At Ole Miss whooped Georgia from start to finish. It was not competitive. Alabama whooped them for 2.5 quarters, and then there was that little period in between where Georgia hit some big plays. Bama was the better team that night. They let Georgia get back in the game, and then they went right back down the field and scored and won the game. They got the W. So I don't see how you can justify doing that just because you beat Tennessee, who also lost to 5-5 Arkansas. Like if Tennessee was undefeated, I think that would matter a little bit more.
Sure.
But that's where I'm coming from, Vince, is I think what you're going to see from the committee this weekend is they're going to, my opinion, they're going to leave Bama, Ole Miss, and Georgia in the same order that they did this past week. That's what I think. And they've kind of boxed themselves into that corner a little bit because how do you justify, for example, moving Georgia ahead of Ole Miss just because 1 week later they beat Tennessee at home when the week before Ole Miss beat Georgia far more convincingly than Georgia beat Tennessee when you talk about game control and how the game played out and all that kind of stuff. And then if you're going to then you're going to move Ole Miss and Georgia ahead of Alabama. What would be your justification for that? Since Alabama 2 weeks in a row beat teams that were ranked at the time, although both of those teams fell out. That's what you could say. So look, both of those teams Alabama beat that were ranked both fell out of the top 25, which could be Notre Dame and Bama both had rough weeks in regard to their quality, their resume, because they both had Alabama had their last 2 wins were over top 25 teams. Missouri and LSU. They both lost. They're now out. But then you can say, well, the team that Missouri lost to is the team that Alabama beat in South Carolina. So it's going to be super fascinating to see how that all shakes out, Vince. Because it's almost like if you're gonna put one of them ahead of Notre Dame, you might have to put more of them ahead of Notre Dame.
Which is why I don't think they're going to do it. Which is one of the reasons I don't think that's going to happen.
Because you have Notre Dame ahead of them, right?
I do, yeah. I got Notre Dame 6. I think they move into the 6th spot. And you're right, because then that, no matter how you finagle the rankings, Notre Dame at 6 still has them seated at 8.
Right.
Still has them seated at 8 because the ACC champ is going to jump them. And then either or the Big 12 or the Group of 5 is going to jump them, and it's going to drop them down to the 8th spot. So,
I have a hard time seeing Georgia jump ahead of Bama and Ole Miss. I could be on board with them jumping ahead of Ole Miss, even with the recency of that win, because I hate recency bias. Because the argument you can make is Ole Miss's only good win is really over Georgia, right? So they got one good win, where Georgia now has two good wins, right? I mean, you've got the win over Clemson, and you've got now the win over Tennessee. Correct? I mean, that's their three good wins. And they also have the win over Texas, number 3 Texas, where Ole Miss only really has the one, and that was over Georgia. But what hurts Ole Miss is both of their losses look really bad now. LSU's 6-4, Kentucky's 4-6. You know what I mean? Like, that's the challenge that you have, Vince, is it can't just be head-to-head. Head-to-head's part of it, but you also have to look at overall resume. So if you're going to bump a team down, I think you could make a case that they do jump ahead of Ole Miss. I think that'll cause an uproar. And I think Ole Miss is playing as well as any team in the country right now. I mean, they're as hot as anybody in the country right now, in my opinion. But overall resume, if you just took the teams that they played and just look at the quality of the teams they played, not necessarily the head-to-head part, the only thing Ole Miss really has over Georgia is head-to-head and style points. But Georgia's overall resume is significantly stronger, including way better losses. That's the thing that hurts Ole Miss. And the committee has clearly put a lot of stock on losses, Vince. So, and you could say, well, how are you going to have Georgia ahead of Ole Miss? Well, that's how. Because, yes, the head-to-head is there, but both of Ole Miss's losses are to unranked teams, and they're clearly dinging teams for bad losses and giving teams praise for good losses. Well, nobody has 2 better losses than what Georgia has, because they lost to last week's number 10 Bama and last week's number 11 Ole Miss, both on the road, and they beat number 2019 Clemson or 22 Clemson. They beat number 3 Texas, and they beat I keep drawing a blank on the third top 25 win that Georgia has. They beat Tennessee, the team they just beat, Tennessee.
Yeah.
So I could see that, but when you look at the strength of Alabama's overall schedule, I'd have a hard time. I don't think you can make the same case for Georgia jumping Bama as you can for Georgia bumping Ole Miss. That's where I'm at. That's why I think maybe one, but I could see all 3 of them move up, because it's going to kind of take care of itself, right? Like if Georgia gets to the SEC title game, then they'll leap up ahead because, or they'll fall behind because Texas beats them.
So
right,
what you're saying.
That's another thing.
So let me ask you what you're saying. So are you saying that you think, because right now in the current rankings, you got Notre Dame 8, Miami 9, Alabama 10, Mississippi 11, Georgia 12, right? So you've kind of got that block of teams from 8 to 12, right? Yep. And then you can even throw Boise in there if you want to at 13. So just a block of teams, they all won, right? And you got BYU and Tennessee that lost above them. Are you taking that whole block the way it is right now and just moving them up 2 spots?
I would say that's probably what I think they will do. I'm not saying that I would do that, because I would correct the mistake of having Miami ahead of Alabama. I would not have Miami ahead of Alabama.
So then does that drop Miami behind that entire block?
No. What I would do. You're asked. What I'm saying is what I think the committee will do.
Okay, gotcha.
Is move that whole block up and just drop Tennessee behind them all and drop BYU behind them all.
Okay.
Is what I think they'll do.
Okay.
What I'm curious is where
behind them all,
where do they submit
which
that block?
Right. So how big is the block then?
Because that's the question. That's what I was going to say.
Okay, because you got Georgia, then you got Boise and SMU. State, then you got SMU, and then you got Texas A&M. They won too.
I think Tennessee falls behind Georgia.
Okay.
and I would not be shocked if they stayed ahead of Boise and SMU. Because the thing that hurts Texas A&M is Texas A&M doesn't have the win that the other teams have.
Okay.
Tennessee's got the win over Bama. Ole Miss has the win over Georgia. Bama has a win over Ole Miss. What's the win that A&M's hanging their hat on right now?
Okay.
Like their best win so far is LSU and Missouri, and they're both knocked out of the top 25. So I don't and Texas A&M also has a great loss to Notre Dame, but they have a bad loss. Not that South Carolina's a bad loss in that they lost to South Carolina. It's they got stomped in the second half of that game.
Okay.
That's what I mean by bad loss.
Okay. So you're sliding Tennessee between Georgia and Boise.
I would say I would probably drop Tennessee in between. What I think they'll do is drop Tennessee in between Boise and Georgia.
Okay.
They'll drop them right behind there.
Where's BYU going to get slotted in?
I think BYU
because they beat SMU, so
that's
in
right.
theory they should be above.
I think they fall behind Boise and stay ahead of SMU.
Okay,
is what I think that they do.
Okay,
because that head-to-head matters. I mean, and the other thing too is SMU did not help themselves this weekend. Like Boise went on the road and smacked South Carolina. I mean, San Jose State. I mean, it was a close game early. Second half, they did what they needed to do. I think it was 14-14, actually behind 14-0, and then they tied it at halftime, and then they rolled in the second half. Very impressive win where SMU, they kind of struggled a little bit with BC. It was like it was 20-14 halftime, and then BYU takes a second half lead, and then then SMU starts to pull ahead a little bit. But like they struggle a little bit, didn't play all that well. I'm curious how they kind of handle that one. And obviously A&M won. So I could see that kind of how it plays out. Because I think what they need to be careful of, they got to be real careful with where they put SMU. Because if you put SMU too close to the top 12, and you're going to have this whole, we're not going to punish teams for the conference championship games.
Right.
If SMU upsets Miami, you're going to have to put both of them in.
Oof.
You see what I'm saying?
No,
so that's why I think they're going to purposely keep SMU down. And then the thing about SMU is they were hurt more by Louisville losing this weekend than Notre Dame was. Because that was the win SMU was hanging their resume on, Vince. I mean, that's the only big win that SMU has. I mean, they've beaten Nevada, Houston Christian, TCU, Florida State, Louisville, Stanford, Duke, Pitt, and BC. Well, Pitt's now, that win doesn't mean anything anymore. Right. And then Louisville dropping out hurts them big time. So now SMU has got no good wins to hang their hat on, and now they're banking their resume on, well, hey, we've won every week, fine. They can't say that they're playing red-hot football because 2 of their last 3 games have been kind of ugly wins over BC and then over Duke. They only beat Duke by a point in overtime. Had a nice one over Pitt, but that doesn't look as good now because Pitt stinks. They just got smacked again this weekend. Well, they're going to get smacked. They lost to Clemson in a competitive game. They battled. But they lost at home. And so I think the danger is if you're going to set a precedent that we're not going to punish teams for losing in the ACC in the conference title games, the reality is Miami and SMU both control their own destiny getting into the ACC title game. I believe. I could be wrong on that, but I believe that's the case.
Let me see.
And so
that is the case.
So if you're going to say, okay, SMU's at 13 or 12, and
Miami beat Clemson. Miami beat Clemson, so they got a head-to-head.
They did not play Clemson. Neither team has played Clemson. Clemson lost to Louisville and Georgia.
Okay, because right now, if you're just looking at the ACC standings, SMU is number 1 because they're undefeated. Clemson is technically number 2 because they're 7-1, and then Miami's only 5-1.
And I believe Miami would end up going ahead because of all the other things would factor in Miami's favor. They're higher ranked.
I don't know what
we'd have to look into that. Right. The common opponents, they beat Louisville. Okay. Miami beat Louisville. Clemson lost to Louisville. That's, you know what I mean? Okay. So the danger is there, Vince, is that if and that's what I could see how they could maybe manipulate moving Miami down too. Because if Miami is at 9 or 8 and SMU's at 14 and SMU beats Miami in a close game, you're going to drop Miami out now, but you're not going to drop a now 3-loss SEC team out? Because unless Texas gets into the title game, beats A&M, and then Texas loses, the only team that can lose the SEC and have 2 losses is Texas. Every other SEC team other than Texas, if they get into the SEC title game and lose, they're going to have a 3rd loss.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So it's going to be fascinating to see what they do with those 2 ACC teams. Because if you're going to have that model, we're not going to ding a team for being out.
So it's winning percentage versus common opponents is the first one's head to head. And obviously you don't have that.
Mm-hmm.
So winning percentage versus common opponents is the next one.
So we'd have to look into that one and see what that one is.
Yep.
And well, that would absolutely go to Miami. Because Miami's only losses to Georgia Tech. I don't think they don't play Clemson. Georgia Tech doesn't play Clemson, right? And Clemson lost to Louisville, who Miami beat. So common opponents, Miami'd be undefeated against their common opponents, and Clemson would have a loss.
Okay.
So I think the only way Clemson could maybe get in is if SMU loses a game, and then maybe, depending on who that's to, and then maybe you'd have a shot there. Because SMU right now, let's go to SMU's schedule here real quick, Vince.
Who do they have left?
SMU has Virginia and
Cal. Yeah.
So I don't know that. I think the only hope that Clemson has right now is they'd have to lose one of those. Miami'd have to lose again, or SMU'd have to lose twice.
Yeah, they're not going to lose twice, I wouldn't think.
Not to Virginia and Cal.
Yeah.
No, they're not. So Clemson's in a tough spot unless Miami gets beat again. And then who's Miami got left? Yeah. So who's Miami got in their last game? Let's see here.
They have Wake Forest and Syracuse.
Now that at Syracuse game could get a little tricky, Vince.
Yeah,
they're going to smack Wake Forest, but that could get tricky. So,
yeah,
dude, I think this is going to be this upcoming ranking, Vince, barring a lot of upsets. This is going to be the weekend, the rankings release that does the most to define what the postseason will look like without upsets. And here's what I mean by that. The SEC teams that we're talking about, only one that has any kind of chance to earn a really good win is Ole Miss, right? Because if you look at Georgia's remaining schedule and you look at Alabama's remaining schedule and then you look at Ole Miss's remaining schedule, I mean, you could maybe throw Tennessee in there, but I don't know that that's going to matter as much either. So, like, this is what I'm referring to. So, Alabama, if they're where they are now, Georgia has UMass and Georgia Tech at home, right? And then Bama has at Oklahoma, who's 5-5, and has to play Bama and LSU at LSU. So there's a chance they're going to be, if Bama beats them, the best they could be is 6-6, and there's a good chance they're 5-7. That's not an overly impressive win. And then Ole Miss plays at Florida and then home against Mississippi State. Mississippi State stinks, but all of a sudden playing at Florida, the way
a little bit of a challenge.
Lately, well, and it'd be a more respectable win. But if they beat Florida, Florida's still 5-6. Yes, they're scrappy, but they're still 5-6.
The only thing you're going to get out of that game is you got to win it. You got to win that game. Like you know what I mean? Like the only way that game matters is if they lose it.
Right.
Like,
and then
that's the point I'm making.
And then Tennessee plays UTEP at home and then at Vanderbilt. I don't know that Vanderbilt game is going to mean as much, especially if Vanderbilt loses at LSU this weekend, which that would be phenomenal to see Clark Lee.
Oh, my gosh.
We're not going to get into that.
Let's just run back Vanderbilt being good.
Yeah.
Just run it back.
And by the way, to a response from Kuya Joey, we're not talking about the quality of wins. He said Alabama still has to play Auburn. I know you guys think that's an easy win, but it never is. That's not the point of what we're discussing here. All rivalry games are tough. Notre Dame's got to play Army and USC. They got to handle business. What we're talking about is if they all win out, what does the resume look like and how can you build your resume? So, like, if Alabama played a typical old school Auburn team that was top 10, top 15, then Bama would have a chance that moves the needle from a resume standpoint, is what we're saying. And, they got to play Auburn and it's a rivalry. That's not the point, though. Just make sure people understand. We're not saying that mean, Georgia could lose to Georgia Tech. That's a rivalry game. Georgia Tech gave them a game a year or two ago. The Georgia Tech gave them a game. What we're saying is, if everybody wins out, what teams can really make a statement and jump up? And especially related to Notre Dame, none of them play a schedule like Notre Dame is going to play in regard to potential needle-moving wins, because Notre Dame's the only one that has a team that's ranked by the committee in the top 25. You know what I mean? That's where I'm at. So, yes, Bama might have – let's just say Bama has a battle with Auburn, right? And Notre Dame may have a battle with USC. The last time Notre Dame blew out USC at USC, Vince, was 2000 with Julius Jones. That's been a long time.
Yeah.
And before that, it was 1988 was the last time they really smacked them in the Coliseum. That's not the point. The point is are there games that are going to impact your resume greatly? What's left on the schedule that's going to all of a sudden put Georgia ahead of Bama or Ole Miss ahead of whoever or Tennessee? There are none of those games left for those SEC teams in the regular season. That's the point. So how they shake those four teams out this week it's gonna be hard pressed to see any of them move other than that team, one of those teams going into the SEC title game and, obviously beating Texas. Then they go up. Now it's like, okay, where does Texas rank in that group?
Yeah.
That could get fascinating because then Texas's only good win would be over A&M.
Yeah.
Right? So let's say Texas loses to Bama in the title game and their only good win is A&M, who then would drop down to around 20 or so, and then they'd be 1-2 against top 25 teams. And you compare that to road, let's say round 10-2 Georgia, who beat them. Like, think about that. If Texas goes 11-1, beats A&M, and then gets dropped by Bama in the title game by a touchdown, where do you put Texas at that point in time? Because Ole Miss and Georgia both have better resumes than Texas at that point, now that the win total is equal. But then you say, well, you're not going to ding them too much for the title game. Well, this could get interesting, dude. It could get really interesting to see how that plays out. So, man, this rankings release is huge for all these teams, for Notre Dame, for Miami and the ACC, for the SEC. It's going to be fascinating, barring upsets. Now, what could very well happen is Penn State could go get beat by Minnesota this week. They drop completely out, and all those SEC teams get in. That could also happen. But if A&M beats Texas, this gets even crazier because now Texas is still in the conversation, Vince, but now A&M is playing for the SEC championship. This is gonna be such a fun final 2 weeks, dude. Such a fun final 2 weeks. It really is. It really is. And somebody asked, what happens if you have a 3-loss SEC runner-up? I would say, as long as it's a competitive game where they were in it, I think their ranking stays the same for the most part. If it's Georgia, Bama, one of those teams. The only team that I could see make it and get a third loss is if Texas loses to A&M, somehow still gets in the SEC title game. I don't even know if that's possible. And then loses again. I think Texas will drop all the way out because they have nothing to build their resume on, Vince. They have no wins to build their resume on.
Yeah.
Where Tennessee, Georgia, Ole Miss, and Alabama all have really good wins to build their resume on. Texas will have none. All those other teams, like if you have a team 10th and they go and, let's say if Bama 9th and Bama goes and plays a barn burner against Texas and it's a back and forth game and a great game, phenomenal game. Texas wins in a walk-off touchdown drive or a walk-off field goal. I'm not dropping Bama for playing a game that no one else was good enough to qualify for. The only time I would drop them in that case is if they get smacked, where they're just clearly the Texas is clearly better than they are, or A&M is clearly better than they are. That would be the only example that I would do. So it's going to be fun, Vince. We're going to have a lot of fun talking about this on Tuesday night. There's no doubt about that.
Oh yeah, so make sure you guys tune in. I haven't checked to see what time the college football playoff rankings are, the show or whatever. On Tuesday. But make sure you guys tune in. That's why you got to hit the notification bell, people. That way you know when there's going to be a show on Tuesday night, because it's going to be pretty much different every Tuesday night. But we're always going to have a show talking about the rankings and where things go. And while all of the SEC seeding is going to be very, very fascinating coming into Tuesday,
The Big Ten's going to be fascinating after this weekend.
And that's the thing. I think the
we'll
Big
talk
Ten
about that Tuesday.
Because right now you've got four Big Ten teams in the top 5. That's not going to hold. Okay, so
unless Indiana beats Ohio State in a close game, and they still want to try to pretend like Ohio State should be in there since their losses are to number 1, and then
there's no way they're in the top 4 with 2 losses.
I don't think Penn State should be in the top 4, but they have them there. Like you talked about, like if we're talking about what they should do. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think once the season is over, the regular season is over, I think now they're going to start comparing resumes. And I think once that happens, if Notre Dame does what they're supposed to do the next 2 games, then I think Notre Dame leaps Penn State. And then Penn State's going to be behind. So yeah, real
quick, Vince, I think you're correct. I just think the committee has, with Ward Manuel at the top, is overinflating the Big Ten, they're focusing on losses. And I could see them say, hey, well, their only losses were to Oregon, number 1, and then what would then become number 2, because Indiana would vault up to number 2. And if Indiana beats Ohio State with a walk-off field goal, don't kid yourself that the committee might not still have Ohio State in the top 5 or 6. Shouldn't, but they could.
Yeah,
which would be stupid.
It's going to be tough. But
what's going to be you know what the SEC is going to be doing this weekend? They're going to have 4 words. Go Buckeyes, go Gophers.
Oh,
because that would knock Penn State and Indiana behind all of them.
100%. Yeah,
I think Indiana would still get in, but Indiana would be at the bottom of all those SEC teams.
They'll still get in because there'll be a 1-loss Big Ten team, and the Big Ten's going to get more than 1 team in, right? I mean, there's still going to be a 1-loss Big Ten.
They're going to get more than 2. If Penn State,
agreed. Right. I'm just saying.
You meant at large. I'm sorry. You meant at large.
They're not going to get ousted all the way out. Is the point that I'm making? So
it's at 7:00, Vince. By the way, it's at 7:00. Good. I'm not sure if we're going to be going live at that exact time. Well, we will go live at that time, kind of probably a little bit before, but I don't know if we're going to go be on CFB Nation or if we're going to go Irish Breakdown. I got to talk to those guys at CFB Nation. But if we do the CFB Nation live show, which is why all of you need to be subscribed to the CFB Nation YouTube channel, because if we're going to go live there, you can watch that, and then Vince and I will go live afterwards on Irish Breakdown. But we may just go live again on Irish Breakdown. We'll see. We'll see how that goes. So anyway, Vince, it'll be at 7:00. And then do you know what's coming on right after that? It's Northern Illinois at Miami of Ohio.
No.
Is Maction right afterwards.
Love that. I love Maction in November.
Right afterwards, So 7:00, it looks like it's an hour-long show. So it's not, fortunately, it's not in between two basketball games.
They're going an hour.
And it's right after Sports Center, so it won't be interrupted. It won't be like last time where we didn't know what time it was going to start. Yeah. This time it's going to be right at 7, right after Sports Center.
Yeah.
So, that's where I'm at. It's
going
to be fun.
So, hey, you got to tune in. So, got a full week of shows and a full week of content for you guys. So make sure you are tuning in. Of course, Monday there's no afternoon show, at least not at the moment, unless you decide to do something different, Brian. But there will be IB Nation Sports Talk, and I will promise you that the college football rankings will be discussed. And we're actually already banting about some topics that we're going to talk about tomorrow. So make sure you tune in at 5:00 tomorrow for IB Nation Sports Talk. Might have a special guest. Just throwing it out there. And so that'll just fire up the conversation even more. So, and then of course, Tuesday, we get back to our normal, regularly scheduled programming of afternoon show, evening show, and then we'll have our college football ranking reaction show, so on, so forth, and more. So got to stay locked in. So make sure you hit that like button, that subscribe button, that notification bell, share with your family and friends, and of course, jump on the boards at irishbreakdown.com. That notification bell is very, very important this time of year, because you just never know when there might be a commitment. There might be a ranking show we're going to talk about, which is at a different time every Tuesday. You got to know. You got to know when it's going to be. So make sure you do that. And thanks for hanging out with us tonight on a little bit of Irish Breakdown After Dark. It's my favorite time to do shows. So for Brian, I'm Vince, and we will talk to you next time, which will be tomorrow evening on the Irish Breakdown podcast. Have a great night, everybody.
Peace.